yeah, the main thing for prayers is to generate correct motivation, right? So that's for us the most important thing to start with. So try to generate the motivation, as we're going to talk about courageous compassion, or yeah, and how to take, you know, to generate not only compassion but also to generate the body, mind, and to practice the 6 perfections, right? So that's what we're going to discuss today. So in according to those topics, also we try to generate the correct motivation. So think that, you know, surrounding yourself by these countless sentient beings in maybe human aspect, but infinite in number, and then think that with most of them, or many of them, so to say, you have an uncommon karmic connection, right? All other Buddhas might not have a karmic connection with them. So it might be very difficult for them, if you don't develop, to get out of samsaric suffering. So for that purpose, yeah, okay. So it's extremely important to generate this kind of intention to work for the benefit of them, because without you achieving enlightenment and without you developing on the stage of the path to enlightenment, all those other modern sentient beings which you have a common connection with, they are basically stuck, right? So that means that it's a responsibility for us to help them and to develop, because we have uncommon karmic connections with many other Buddhas cannot really benefit because the karmic connection is lacking. So try to think in those lines, that for that purpose we're here. For that purpose we're going to study or even discuss bodhicitta and the 6 perfections. Yeah? So try to think in those lines before we start. And then in front of yourself, you can imagine Sakyamuni Buddha surrounded by the different masters of India and the masters of Tibet and other Buddhist traditions. And then if you are Buddhist, you can take refuge, and otherwise just think about the things we just talked about to generate correct motivation. Yeah. Sangye Jeda Zoni Tsunam La Janjo Bada Dani Yasu Yagi Jinzo Gibe Tsunangi Dola Penje Sangye Doba Jo Sangye Jeda Zoni Tsunam La Janjo Bada Dani Yasu Dagi Jinzo Gibe Tsunangi Dola Penje Sangye Doba Jo Sangye Jeda Zoni Tsunam Janjo Bada Dani Yasaji Dagi Chinzo Gibe Dola Penja Sangye Doba Shu Kangi Tuzini Zue Tawatanju Pamachir Tamachuni Tunsuba Putam Dela Chatsera Lung. Yeah, so those who do prayers sometimes, there's one prayer by Lama Tsongkhapa called the Foundation for Good Qualities. And there it reads, even though I've generated bodhicitta, but if I do not practice the 3 types of morality, I will not achieve enlightenment, right? So that actually summarizes the topic, or the topics of today. Yeah? So a few of you are already studying or studied the 6 perfections. So it says, although if you have generated bodhicitta, right, if you don't take action in the development of going for the supreme goal of full enlightenment, then you have to take certain kind of commitments, right? You have to take a particular direction. And why is that so? Because you have to create causes for enlightenment, right? So in order to become a Buddha, the motivation by itself is not enough, right? So you have to generate what we say causes and conditions in order to achieve that goal. Same if you want to become a doctor or a good scientist whatsoever, then the motivation by itself is not enough. You know, you have to take action in in the development. You have to take action in taking an education, right? And get experience. So in a similar way, we don't have to go into too much detail about bodhicitta because most of you, I think, already studied that quite a bit. So that means that bodhicitta, we have different types of bodhicitta, right? Or the mind that wishes all sentient beings to be free of suffering. And in order to accomplish that freedom of suffering, that's things to establish the state of enlightenment for that purpose, right? So in Tibetan, we say, Ninje Semchelamik, right? Then Sherap Janjuglamik, which means that compassion is focused upon the suffering of sentient beings, right? The suffering of sentient beings, because compassion is defined as a mind that wishes to liberate sentient beings, right? So that's the compassion aspect. Then Sherap, or the wisdom aspect, focuses upon enlightenment, right? So there's two things there. Yes, Holiness always summarizes these two lines that, you know, compassion is focused on sentient beings, meaning compassion is defined as to liberate sentient beings from their suffering. Yeah. So in order to liberate sentient beings from their suffering, for that purpose, we have to understand the suffering of samsara, right? Without understanding a problem in life, you can never help another person to solve that particular problem. If you understood that problem, depression or physical thing you went through in life, and then you pass that period, then it's very easy for you, or easier for you, to help another person who has a similar problem, right? Because you have some experience. So in a similar way, if we really understand the suffering of samsara, then there's a bigger possibility to help others to eliminate suffering. Right? So that's what the Buddha also said. I cannot take away your suffering, or I cannot wash away your sins, or I cannot give my realizations to you, but I can show you how to do it, or I can show you the path, right? So that's because we have individual forms of consciousness. So that means that eventually we have to do it ourselves. Yeah? It's not that we go to the supermarket and buy a pill or medicine and that solves all our problems. Or now there's all kind of developments in people with, they think that you can connect computers with the brain and then become a powerful human being or something. Yeah. So it's not possible to put a chip in your brain and that solves all the problems, right? So that means that we have individual streams of consciousness. So on the individual level, we have to develop, right? So that's exactly what the Buddha said, I cannot take away suffering or wash away negativities or purify your mind. Right? If that were possible, the Buddha would already have done that 2,500 years ago, and the previous Buddhas also, of course, right? So that's not the case. But the Buddha shows us the path. So that means that in order to generate this compassion, we have to understand suffering of samsara. Yeah? And there's not the suffering of a headache, right? Or the suffering of a physical pain or depression. That's just one aspect of suffering, right? The very coarse form of suffering, the suffering of suffering. That's not what the Buddha talked about. And it's also not the suffering of change. It's like my room is in the northern part of the building. So in summer, it's very cool. But in winter, the northern wind just enters, because I'm used to live for more than 2 decades in a country in South India where I always have the windows always open, right? So then when you come to the West in the winter when it's freezing cold, people close the windows and put on the central heating, right? So then it causes me headaches and I find claustrophobic kind of, so I always have my window a little bit open. But then in winter, that's why I mostly escape in winter to India. But this year it's a bit difficult because of certain kind of conditions of samsara, you see? Things we don't expect, but it shows us the COVID-19 that the uncertainty of samsara is there. It's always underneath the surface. It just needs a few conditions to come into existence, right? So when the Buddha said suffering, he didn't say the suffering of suffering, like a sickness or headache or, you know. And then what I just talked about, the next one, suffering of change. So when I'm in my room, it's very cool. When I come here in the temple, it's warmer again. Especially in summer, it's too warm here. So then I go to my room, and then the wind comes, it's too cold. So I always walk back and forth, you see. That's kind of the suffering of change. And it's also very easy to recognize, you know, for us. But a pervasive compounding form of suffering, that's a suffering that is really to be understood. You know, it sounds quite a bit, but that means that as long as we have, in short, it means as long as we have karma and afflictions, right? As long as we have karma and afflictions, we stuck. Meaning, there's always a possibility to suffer, and we cannot escape. For example, when you get sick, you know, when you catch the virus and some other health issues are there, then it's very easy to get really sick and die, right? So that's just a matter of fact of meeting conditions. So from our side, we have the causes present, you know. So during the lockdown, I was reading the news a little bit more than I used to normally do. And there was one very interesting comment of a lady who was here in the hospital in London, I think. She said, oh, she had really difficult breathing and a lot of pain. She said, oh, I was just stuck in this body, you know? And that's exactly, though she probably doesn't know anything about Buddhism, but it's a very interesting comment. Stuck in this body, you cannot do anything about it. Though you wish no suffering, but you're stuck, right, by the power of karma and afflictions, you know? So as long as you have karma and afflictions, as we know, destructive emotions causes the mind to suffer, that causes us to say negative things to others, cause others to suffer, or physical harm, etc., etc. So that's a very easy, understandable aspect of karma and afflictions, right? Because it's also cause and effect relationship. And there are afflictions, right? You're angry, upset with a person, you shout at a person, or you say something nasty. That disturbs your mind, disturbs the mind of the other person. That's also karma and afflictions, right? So there's a very coarse form of karma and afflictions. There's more subtler aspects because of the continuity of consciousness over lifetimes. So that means that since beginner's lifetime, we have this habituation to karma and afflictions, and we have all these causes and conditions within our continuum. It's very easy to get sick. And when we're sick, we like to get better, but sometimes it doesn't happen. Or it doesn't happen right now, right? So that means it's beyond the control of karma and afflictions, right? Yeah, so that understanding of suffering, what we call all pervasive, because it's everywhere, right? The tip of your toe to the crown of your body, you just have to meet fire and there's a pain, right? Or all pervasive, wherever you go in samsara, right? It's wherever you go, there's always suffering underneath the surface. Or on this planet, you know, wherever you go, you travel, do a world trip, then you won't be happy all the time, right? So that means wherever you go with the body, you know, if you keep your mind, the mind is with you, right? You have to. We have a new camera, you can see. So I now have to learn to look there instead of on the screen. So that means wherever you go in samsara or in the world, it's not that if you don't train your mind, you cannot become happier and happier and happier. You know? So that means that outer conditions, they help, right? If we're a little bit down or something, we need a break, go for a walk, something like that. It's a condition, right? But it's not a cause for the real substantial cause for transformation. So that means that we have to train the mind. Yeah, we have to train the mind. And well, in a way to eliminate those destructive emotions and to purify karma, right? So the two main causes of suffering. As long as we have destructive emotions, there's no freedom. Yeah, some people say, oh, they protest against lockdown. They say we need freedom. But actually the real freedom is a freedom of the afflictions, is a freedom of suffering, right? Isn't it? So that's kind of the real freedom. And that's what the Buddha actually was talking about. You know? The real freedom is not being able to travel the world or to travel everywhere you like, but the real freedom is from within, right? Yeah, so that's why you can see some of the meditators, you know, in Dharamsala or there in Nepal or in Himalayas, or, yeah, in the forest. You know. So some live so simple. They don't have anything in the room. It's like nothing, you know. But the mind is so blissful. So much happiness, you know. Milarepa also, he had a cave and there was a thief coming at night. And he told the thief, he said, look, what do you expect to find? I cannot find anything in this cave during the day. What do you expect to find at night? You know? So that means they don't have any possessions. You know? So that means that, but there's so much happiness. So that proves that the happiness, you know, the real happiness that gives satisfaction doesn't come from external aspects or things we have in life, right? So it comes from the mind. Yeah, so that summarizes that we have to understand what is the cause for happiness and what is the cause for suffering, right? And then based on those wishes, based on those understandings, we try to generate a kind of wish to be free of suffering. Yeah, so wish to be free of suffering, what we call renunciation. Without a real understanding of the suffering of samsara, then to generate compassion is very difficult. Right? Many texts talks about it, but it's logical, right? If you don't really understand suffering, how can you generate a wish for others to be free of suffering? You know? So that's why the first aspect of bodhicitta is this wish for sentient beings to be free of suffering. So you have to understand this all-pervasive compounding form of suffering. And then you have to see that it's not only we or us who are in this nature of suffering, right? You know, it's not only, we're not the only person who have suffering of getting older and getting sick and, you know, all kinds of things. Every single sentient being, every single human being on this planet, right, has the same wish, you know, not wanting suffering and wanting happiness. Right? So we just being one, wanting happiness, not wanting suffering, and they be so many, so you can do the maths and see what's most beneficial. So based on that kind of understanding, we try to generate a kind of compassion for all modern sentient beings, right? And this compassion is this, what we say, that focuses upon the suffering of sentient beings. So that by itself is not enough, right? The wish for others to be free of suffering is not enough. We also have to be clever, know the method how to do it. In a similar way, in scientific findings, we can see that empathy versus compassion, there's a huge difference between the two states of mind. Yeah? Empathy, a mere wish, not even a wish actually, is kind of feeling the suffering of others, right? Well, compassion is not only feeling the suffering of others, but has a wish to, you know, to separate them from the suffering. It's a much more constructive form of mind. Yeah? So even in science, we come to the conclusion that compassion is much more constructive than just merely thinking about the suffering of others. Right? So if you watch the news and you see a lot of suffering, it helps, right? to understand, right? But if you just think, oh, you know, you just find it sad, that by itself is not really constructive, you know, not for yourself and not for the other person. But if you think and you see the suffering and you understand this incredible suffering, but you generate a wish, you know, that people have to be free of their suffering, right? How wonderful it would be if free of suffering. May they be free of suffering, right? And then it goes to the next step, may I cause them to be free of suffering. So then you generate this kind of compassion according to what we say, or the special intention. Yeah, if you study the 7 cause and effect methods of generating bodhicitta, right? The mind of enlightenment, you know that the 6th cause for bodhicitta to come about is this kind of special intention, right? You reflect on equanimity first, to see all sentient beings as equal, right? Because without equanimity, you will say something like, oh, may all sentient beings be free from suffering, except this one, or except that one. You know, so in traffic or wherever you go, you know, right, exclude sentient beings all of a sudden, you know. So that has to be prevented, you know. So to prevent it from happening, you meditate on equanimity to see all sentient beings as equal. I think most of you studied that already. to see friend, enemy, and stranger. You know, you can classify all personalities out of your life in the threefold classification, right? And so, and to analyze that over time they change, you know, and that just human beings wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. You know? So there's one aspect to prepare. There's the field. You know? Equanimity is a field. You know? Then we have to get close to sentient beings. If we don't get close to sentient beings, then it's very difficult to generate a wish for them to be free of suffering, right? So that's very clearly explained in Lama Tsongkhapa's great exposition, or the Lam Trim Chemo, right? Where it talks very clearly about, in order to generate bodhicitta, we have to get very close to sentient beings, right? And that we do by, based on this equanimity, we try to see all sentient beings as your mother or your father or parents or people who took care of you, right? So since beginner's lifetime, if you take the continuity of consciousness into account, that there's no beginning, then we have depended upon mothers and fathers and beings took care countless times, right? So in countless ways, they've been our father, mother, or who took care. There's a lot of difficulty and hardships involved. Even in animal realm, we can see that, you know, little cats taking care of the kittens, you know, or dogs, and puppies. In the monastery, we have many things to learn from, you know, to see, especially when they're wild, you know. Here, yeah, it's in the West, it's all kind of more kind of an artificial aspect of the reality of the animal realm. But yeah, so if you see how much hardships they on the go or give of their own life, even humans, you can see some parents or mothers, you know, they give away their own life for their child. Sometimes complication at birth, you know, happens, you know. It's amazing, right? So since beginner's lifetime, if you really understand that aspect, then you also know there are so many beings who be so kind to you, right? So that's what you reflect upon, you know, to get closer to sentient beings. That's the purpose. You know? So you reflect upon the kindness they have given to you, and then try to generate a wish to repay, to do something for them, you know. And that builds a kind of relationship with sentient beings, right? And based on that relationship, you generate what they call love and kindness, you know. And love and kindness is kind of the moisture, right? So the equanimity is the field, the ground, right? Then love and kindness, as we just talked about, is just the moisture or fertilization, maybe you can say, the corporate condition. You know? And the real seed for bodhicitta is compassion, right? So then if you're very close to sentient beings, and then you contemplate their suffering, then automatically there's a wish, you know, to do something, to help them, right? If you're close to another human being on this planet, it's easier, right? If a friend or you, or a dear friend, or a relative you're very close to has a problem, you want to help, right? There's a very close feeling is there. Mm-hmm. So, and that doesn't happen when you see somebody walking on the street or something like that, you know? So that's a kind of a lack of equanimity we, most of us have, right? So when His Holiness Dalai Lama sometimes you see His Holiness in public, he doesn't make a distinction between a high official on stage or somebody back in the crowd. You know? They're completely the same in His Holiness, in his eyes. You know? So that means that this real genuine form of equanimity is present, right? So we have to put some effort in that direction. Yeah? So then you don't make a distinction, and then you generate this close feeling by these sequences of the 6 cause and effect. So the 6 causes, right? So love and kindness we just talked about. So then it goes to compassion, the wish for others to be free of suffering, right? And then it goes to special intention, this kind of responsibility. I will take care. I will do it. You know? I will cause them to be free of suffering. So there's already 2 compassions, you see. One compassion with things how wonderful it would be if sentient beings were free of suffering. May they be free of suffering, right? So there's two compassions within what we normally recite, the four immeasurables. You know? Yeah. So then we like to take that a step further. Not how wonderful it would be for sentient beings free of suffering, may they be free of suffering, but I will cause them to be free of suffering, right? So that's even more needed, you know. So I will cause them to be free of suffering, you know. That's kind of this special intention, right? That's the seed for bodhicitta to arise. And why is it the seed? Because we just started the talk with Ningje Semchen Lamik, which means compassion focused upon suffering of sentient beings, just here we talked about. But there's also something that we call Sherab, or wisdom, Janjuk Lamik. Means Sherab, or the wisdom, is focused upon enlightenment, you know. So that means that just a mere wish and the responsibility is not enough, right? We have to see what is the capacity I have right now and what is the capacity if I develop, right? So if you then think about the stage of a Buddha or His Holiness Dalai Lama, what they can do for beings and what I can do, there's a difference, right? So, and there's a big difference. Yeah? So then you try to generate a wish to achieve a state like that, you know, to develop the mind to its full potential and to achieve enlightenment, you know, and then you can do so much more for sentient beings, right? Yeah. So that's this kind of two aspects of bodhicitta, or two kind of aspirations, right? Aspiration for sentient beings to be free of suffering, and aspiration to achieve enlightenment for that purpose. So bodhicitta is a main mind. Yeah, those who have studied mind and mental factors, then they know the distinction between the two. So bodhicitta is a main mind, right? And there's two aspirations, right? They're actually mental factors that help to make this main mind stronger. You know? Yeah. So then you have developed this bodhicitta, right? This mind that wishes to become a Buddha in order to liberate sentient beings. Right? It's a very powerful mind, because if you have that mind in your continuum, spontaneous, that means for us it takes time, right? We have to put effort. We practice patience, for example. We have to really put ourselves sitting down and put effort in contemplation, right? And then in meditation, everything is fine. Yeah. And then we get out of our room, and then we see the person we practice patience with in our room, but then the patient doesn't stay. Then we get irritated, or we get a message from somebody, irritation comes. You know? So that all proves that patience is not a realization yet, right? So with bodhicitta, same thing, you know. It has to be spontaneous, and that's a matter of time. You know, as Shantideva says, by the power of habituation, everything is possible. You know, so it's just a matter of time to habituate yourself again and again to this understanding and contemplation. So in order to get a realization of bodhicitta, just listening and studying is not enough, right? We have to contemplate these points by reasoning. So that's why we need reasoning. As analytical meditation is so incredibly important to generate this understanding or to generate this mind, right? So by the power of reasoning, you contemplate again and again, and it builds up this kind of understanding of bodhicitta and the wish of bodhicitta, right? So you can imagine the more you contemplate, the stronger it becomes. You know, it's not that realizations, they don't arise in big packages or big chunks or something like that. You know, realizations, they only come step by step, one thing at a time, right? Yeah. So by the power of contemplation about these points, then it's possible. And one day that it becomes spontaneous, right? Like driving a car in the beginning is also very complex. Or if a person from the UK goes to Europe, the other part on the other side of the ocean or the North Sea, two different things now, Europe and UK, you know. So if you go there and they drive on the other side of the road, in the beginning is a bit kind of, you have to get used to it, right? So you have to put effort. But then it becomes spontaneous. One of my friends who was an Indian, and he also went a few months a year in the early days when he had a job. Now he's completely dedicated to Dharma practice, but when he had a job, then also he went to the US and he told me, oh, the US is so boring. You almost fall asleep in traffic. Because India, you always have to be busy. Because always something happening, you know, cows or dogs or cars on the wrong side of the road, you know. Yeah. So that means that for us to drive a car in the beginning is complex, right? But then later on, it becomes automatic, right? We can have a conversation with somebody and be in complete control over the situation driving, you see? So there's the power of habituation, you know? So that's also possible with bodhicitta. It takes a bit longer than a driver's license, but it's possible, right? Yeah. You can imagine, you know, it's just a matter of time and habituation, you know? Yeah. So that's bodhicitta. So then, if bodhicitta has been generated, you know, if bodhicitta has been generated, then, you know, then we have kind of two aspects of bodhicitta. It's kind of, one aspect is the aspirational one, right? And the other one is the engaging one. So the aspirational bodhicitta is the mere wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. Well, engaging bodhicitta is kind of taking action in that direction, right? That's what we're going to talk about. It's kind of wanting to go to, where do you go for holiday? Peak District or Lake District. I mean, there's two things I remember from my hitchhike adventure, probably in 1990, or 89 or something like that. And I was hitchhiking from London to Edinburgh and back. And once we were stuck in the Peak District, behind a pub, in the middle of the night. We arrived there and said, can we put our tent somewhere? He said, yeah, sure, put there. And then behind the pub, and then in the morning, so funny, I opened the zip of the tent, and there's like hundreds of sheep just looking at me. And I didn't see that evening before, right? Yeah. But there was the Peak District, I think. Yeah. Lake District also. So if you imagine you go for a holiday, I don't know, beaches also? Yeah, right? Yeah. So if you go for, now you have to be careful, but normally, right? So if you wish to go, or you're actually planning to go, booking something, or there's two different things, right? So a bodhicitta, same thing. If you mere wish for sentient beings to be free of suffering, or you actually take a direction, you know, to start doing things for that purpose. It's two different things, right? So the aspirational one is the first step, and actually engaging is engaging bodhicitta. So when you talk about the 6 perfections, that talks about this aspect of engagement, right? To engage, to take a commitment. That's what Lama Tsongkhapa said in that verse. Even have generated bodhicitta, but if you have not practiced the 3 types of morality, you will not achieve enlightenment. So you have to create the right causes for enlightenment. So we have this wish for sentient beings to be free of suffering, and we have this wish to achieve enlightenment for that purpose, right? So according to this last wish, we have to do something. We have to create the causes and conditions to become like a Buddha, to become like His Holiness, right? Yeah, so then one aspect is mental training, but the other aspect is kind of accumulation of merit, as we say, of good deeds, you know, in order to produce an incredible, powerful being like a Buddha. You have to create causes and conditions, right? Yeah, so nothing happens randomly, everything is by the power of causes and conditions. We took the example of a doctor, you know, you have to study next to your wish, and you have to engage in different projects, right? So, same thing. Yeah? So this engaging bodhicitta, you know, there's different aspects, right? So, yeah, in order to train in those 6 perfections, we can do that just as an, you know, as a person with this aspiration and practice these 6 perfections, or you can take a commitment to do that. That means you can take what is called the bodhisattva vows, right? So there's a ritual which talks about aspirational bodhicitta. Yeah? This is the mere wish to generate the wish to free sentient beings and become Buddha for that purpose, right? There's an aspiration bodhicitta. There's a little ritual you can do, like taking refuge, you know. It's kind of, it's kind of acknowledgement or commitment. You know, if we commit ourselves to change our mind, for example, if we promise not to get angry tomorrow, you know, you can do that. You can do it just promise yourself, or you can promise that in front of a few people. If you promise it in front of a few people, you automatically will be more, you practice with much more alertness, right? Be more aware, not to break that commitment. If you just promise yourself, it's easy, yeah, okay, it doesn't matter. You know, if you have some bad habits, you know, same thing. Then if we only promise ourselves, it's very easy to break it. But if you promise others, then it lays down a commitment, right? Yeah. So that's with taking refuge, same thing. If people would like to go in that direction, of course, you shouldn't follow or become a Buddhist, you know, just like that. You know, we don't like to convert people. That's not why we're here. You know, we want to try to help people to generate good states of mind, right? To help people to experience more stable form of happiness. That's our main job, right? And His Holiness always says, you know, it's always good to practice the religion or faith of your forefathers. You're accustomed to, you know. But of course, if there's interest, then people can choose to practice another form of faith or religion wherever they feel comfortable with, right? So that's everybody's own right or freedom. So in that way, people can decide later on, or have taken refuge, you know, take refuge. So that means that it's a mental state, but you can also have a kind of acknowledgement of that. The teacher, something like that, or later on with the altar, then it becomes a kind of more, you know, serious step in your development, so to say. So that's also with bodhicitta the case. You can promise to, you know, to take the step of aspirational bodhicitta. It doesn't come with real vows as such, but it is kind of an affirmation that you want to go in that direction. So that helps to generate the mind a bit more, right? A bit bigger commitment. Then on top of that, you can also take bodhisattva vows, right? It's kind of very interesting, you know, root vows and secondary vows, 18 and 46. So you can study them, right, without even taking them initially. You know, it's a very inspiring way of life, you know. So, and then later on, when people feel ready and like to take a commitment, they can take the bodhisattva vows, right? So that's what we're talking about. The bodhisattva vows are there in order to generate the mind of the mind of wanting to dedicate your life for that purpose, right? So that's what you do with bodhisattva vows. You commit yourself to work for the benefit of beings, you know, and then there's an incredible benefit, right? So because you accumulate merits which is needed in order to achieve enlightenment in a very profound way, yeah? And then also you commit yourself to engage in the 6 perfections. Yeah? So that's a little bit about the way we try to go in the future if you really aspire to become a Buddha, right? So this bodhicitta, and then taking the bodhisattva vows, gives us a kind of guidance. Some people think, oh, vows and commitments, ooh, it's too much. Yeah, some people tell me, because I'm a monk, as you can see, and we have vows and commitments, you know, quite a few in number. But some people think, oh, some people asked me once, they said, oh, don't you feel kind of, you know, things obstructing your freedom? So I said, no, it's more freedom actually. It's true, because if you commit yourself not to engage in causes for suffering, right? Is that freedom or not? If you commit yourself to create causes for happiness, that's real freedom, right? That's real freedom, you know? So you know, that's why also bodhisattva vows, they're not all that difficult to keep, you know? If you study them well and which factors have to be complete, and you know. So there's a difference between just merely not engaging in negativity, or committing yourself with a vow not engaging in negativity, or try to do virtue, or committing yourself to do virtue. There's a difference. And why is a difference there? Because if you commit yourself, for example, if you take Mayan precepts, I think most of you have heard about these 8 precepts you can take for 24 hours, right? So, not killing, not stealing, etc. It's not that difficult. So if you normally don't engage in those actions anyway, that's very good. But then, if you take a commitment from now until tomorrow morning, then even when there's no opportunity to engage in negativity, still that intention is in your continuum, right? So that means that from now until tomorrow morning, you promise, you have that continuum in your consciousness even when you sleep. So there's a continuity of accumulation of virtue, as we say, or good deeds, or positive potential. It's kind of continuous there, you see? So if you promise in that way, take commitments for bodhicitta and bodhisattva vows, for example, then every day that commitment is present, right? Of course, you have to first study the vows and see if you can keep them, but as I said, if you see which factors have to be complete, and it's not all that difficult, So some people, they just, many people, they don't really study that much to understand it, and then they already make a decision based on not really understanding that aspect of the training, right? So that's the bodhisattva vow, right? So then you can take a commitment, and then you promise the engaging bodhicitta. We said before, we have 2 bodhicittas, right? Aspirational one and engaging one. So also the verses we recite, there's verses in relation with aspirational bodhicitta, and there's verses with aspiration bodhicitta as well as engaging bodhicitta, right? So that if there's a verse in relation, I will practice the 6 perfections, or I will commit myself to the 6 perfections, that's engaging bodhicitta, right? If there's a kind of wish, how wonderful it would be to become a Buddha for all sentient beings, it's kind of a mere aspirational aspect, you see? So engaging means to engage, to start, to do something, right? So that's why we study the 6 perfections. Then in the 6 perfections, I made a few notes. So thanks to your kindness, I can read a little bit about 6 perfections. So I went to my notes of Lamadrim Chenmo and a few other texts. So that means that in Lamadrim Chenmo, in the beginning, it's very interesting. It's just like one paragraph. It summarizes the need for the 6 perfections. It's very inspiring. It says, in some samsaric suffering, as we just discussed a little bit, samsaric suffering is caused by different things, right? Samsaric suffering, most of it is caused by non-virtue, engaging in non-virtue, right? So to cut those causes for suffering, we practice morality, right? So that's one of the perfections. Then another aspect of samsara, or causes for samsara, is strong desire to aspects of samsara, or the objects of samsara, right? And that's causes suffering. So all our objects, or contaminated objects, so to say, of the senses, right? So whatever thing you desire, then often, most of the time, you overestimate the qualities of that object, right? It's whatever you order online. Many people order online these days. And then what is being delivered, or sometimes doesn't get delivered. I heard one of my friends, he said, I ordered this, I paid money, but I didn't get anything, didn't get my money back, and didn't get it. So that means that we have so many expectations, And then sometimes on delivery, it doesn't look as on the picture, on the website. So, and then we look at the website and oh, amazing, this, that, and that. We actually overestimate more qualities than that exist with the object, right? Or ordering food online here. I don't know in Bath, but here in London it's quite popular. This is people on this kind of scooters. There's an increase in Renfrew Road of the amount of scooters, especially during lockdown. I noticed. So it means many people order online. And then sometimes it's on delivery, it's not exactly the same, people. Not the same temperature, it doesn't look the same. So then people get a little bit kind of discouraged. Why is that? Because they expected so much more, and that reality was not there. So they don't meet that reality, and there's no satisfaction, you see. That's with all things, all the objects of the desire. The stronger the desire is, the stronger the, imputation, or the stronger the labeling of the qualities which actually doesn't exist with that object, And then when that object in reality is being met, there's a problem. Because we think about an object, it's mental consciousness, right? And that mental consciousness is based on a mental image, a meaning generality. That's not an object. It's mentally fabricated, right? So this mentally fabricated image, we just make it as according to our mind, right? So we make it in a way that it's not reality. But we think it's reality, you see? So that's a problem. So when you meet a reality, it's not the same as you thought it was. Because this mental image in your mind, you thought as reality, right? Or you're convinced. It's true, right? If you close your eyes and you think about your last holiday, or the picture of your last holiday, you think, wow, this, then you think actually that picture is the place, but it's not true, right? It's just a mental image. It's mentally fabricated, right? So, same for our objects of desire, for example. We build this mental image of this pizza or whatever you order online, it's amazing. It will taste like this, it will taste like that, and so much happiness. And then it's delivered, and then it's not like that. And then you're not satisfied, or any other thing you order online, So that's why there's no satisfaction, you see? Because we don't understand reality at that time. We think it has qualities, but we have too many expectations, but those expectations are never met, so that's an issue. So with anger and aversion is the opposite, right? When we get annoyed with a person or situation, it's actually the mental image that we actually start to create how that person is. It's not the actual person, right? So you have a conversation with a person and that doesn't go very well, and then you walk away, and then what is left is the mental image of that person. And then you start to think, oh, this person, not a good one, because of this, this, and this, and this. And then you start to enhance all those faults of that person, right? Which is not the person, right? The mental image is not the person. So then you get angry at the mental image of the person, but actually that's not the person, you see? So it's a kind of very confused aspect, but we believe that's reality. So sometimes we believe things that's true, but actually it's not. David Bohm, David Bohm, the very famous physicist. I'm very inspired by him actually. Lately I watched a few of his interviews, very inspiring. So because if you saw infinite potential, I use it, I already talked about a few times, some talks, but it's very interesting. If you see infinite potential, there's a movie about his life, right? So I watched it again to pinpoint down the time when so if you watch it again, you should stop, or you should see at least 1 hour and 1 minute. It's the time of the movie is 1 hour, 1 minute. Then there's a bush. And then he walks behind the bush, and then he talks about something. It's very interesting, especially about reality of the self. He says, this self-identity, he says, it's just like a show. And people believe it's reality, or people believe itself is there, because it feels like that. It feels very, very real, but actually it's not. But people, they feel it's reality, but actually it's just a show, it says. Very interesting. So that means that the I, with appears, is actually, according to Buddhist principles, same thing. It doesn't exist the way it appears. It's very interesting comment, what he makes there. Yeah. So that means whatever appears to a mind is not reality. Yeah, that's kind of a given thing. In quantum mechanics, We can see that, you know, in Buddhist philosophy, we can see that. And also here, with his daily examples of attachment and anger, we can see, right? Yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of how we define. Yeah, why did it come to that? Because in the beginning of Lama Tsongkhapa's section on the sixth perfection, he says, we have causes for samsara, which is desire to objects, right? As we just discussed. That's why I went to the pizza stories and delivery boys or motorcyclists. Some come by car, actually. Yeah. Yeah, anyway, there's more stories about it. Yeah. So, meaning that this desire is not, you know, you can see it, right? It's not going to reality, and that's why the expectations are not met and there's no satisfaction. That's why it's called a suffering. That's what we call samsaric suffering, right? So that's why Lama Tsongkhapa said we have to practice generosity, you know, not to be attached to things in life, and what has been given to you, you can give also, right? So that helps us not to get attached to things. So very interesting. And then from non-virtue, which is a cause for suffering in samsara, we practice morality, right? So that's already the first two of the six perfections. Very interesting story, comment, you know. So then Lama Tsongkhapa goes on and says, okay, you know, going to full liberation, in order to go not only understand the suffering of samsara, I want to get out of this, you know, or the suffering of sentient beings, I want to help them. You know? If we do good and then get angry and we destroy positive potential again, as we know, anger destroys merit or destroys positive potential, right? So then you just kind of one step ahead and two steps back. You know, people who are very angry all the time, you go a little bit ahead, but you get a bit further away, you see. So that means you have to practice patience. Yeah, that's another perfection. You know? And then in order to achieve your goals, you need effort, right? So we're going to talk about it as well. So that's two aspects there. Yeah? So the first, generosity and morality, was opposing samsaric suffering, right? You see that? Yeah. So the next two, patience and effort, helps us to progress in the path, right? Yeah. And then in order to really cut the root of our problems, like anger and attachment we just talked about, right? The root of all this is ignorance, is grasping at a concrete IMI, as just David Bohm talks about. You know, that there is a self. You know, if you call your own name, I can read your names, but you know, you can also call your own name, and then you say, where is Tenzin Namdak? You know, it's kind of, you can look, it's not in the body, it's not in the mind, it's not separate from body and mind. Right? So you can see that that's actually the self, how it appears, is not really reality. But how it appears is a problem. Because then we say I, me, myself. And because of this I, me, myself, there's this kind of incredible strong self-centeredness, right? And self-centeredness, even in many types of research, in the medical field or the field of psychology, it talks about this as well. That self-centeredness actually is a cause for low self-esteem, a cause for depression, for high blood pressure, heart diseases. It's very interesting. It's not only the Buddha who talked about low self-esteem, talked about the self-centeredness being cause for problems, right? So even in scientific findings, we come to similar conclusions. Very interesting research being done regarding self-centeredness, you know, or very strong ego. And we, from experience point of view, we can see, right? The person who is very self-centered always talks about himself. You know, I this, I that, me, myself, this. It feels uncomfortable to be around a person like that. You probably have experienced that sometimes. So that means that that's a kind of natural reaction as well, you know. So that means that this self-centeredness is a really cause for problems. It's a really cause for suffering, you know. And it's also proving by the power of strong desire or strong anger is rooted in this concrete I and mine. why does this person say this to me? I'm not like that. You know, self-protection comes based on this concrete concept of I am. Or I need this, you know, I need that. You know, people very strong, you know, desires. They need the newest iPhone, and when it comes out, then even they throw stones at the shield of the windows of the store if the store doesn't open in time. It happens. You can see on the news sometimes. People really need something, and then their desire is not met, and there's irritation, right? Yeah. But if you give them the phone, it's not that they become the happiest human being on the planet, right? It's kind of mentally fabricated. If I have this, amazing. So that is also based on a concrete I am I, you see? So this self that appears to exist from its own side, without dependence, right? That's how it appears. So very concrete, very independent, you know, all by itself. So that's fueling all our destructive emotions, you know, all the time. But if you examine, where is this I? You can actually find it. One of my friends who works for His Holiness, one of the translators actually, he sent me a very nice link of an interview and a kind of conversation between His Holiness, a scientist, a psychiatrist, and a patient. And the patient said, I'm depressed. And then His Holiness says, why? And then they start talking about things, and then says, I'm depressed. And then His Holiness says, where is his eye? He said, there. They're pointing at the chest, it's there. And then they ask her, is it round, is it circular, or is it square, you know? And then she said, oh, I think it's circular, it's round, I think. Okay, now you move it 1 centimeter from the right to the left, okay? And then she closed her eyes and she said, oh, it disappeared. So that's exactly a very interesting point, because it appears in a particular way with this destructive, right? But actually doesn't exist the way it appears, you see? So in order to understand that aspect of reality, you need concentration and wisdom. Concentration to focus, to analyze well, right? And wisdom to use reasoning to prove it doesn't exist the way it appears. So that's the last two perfections, right? To generate the completion all the way up to enlightenment, right? So you can see Lama Tsongkhapa makes a kind of threefold division with two perfections each, right? So first is the samsaric suffering and how to get out of that, right? Of negative deeds with morality, right? And to not get attached to things in samsara with generosity, one thing, right? Then to progress on the path, you know, to practice patience and having effort, right? And to come to the full completion of enlightenment, you need concentration and wisdom, right? You need the two, what is called, you know, we have 3 higher trainings, right? We have morality, concentration, and wisdom, right? So if you want to progress, eventually, in order to become a Buddha, right? You need a mind that understands reality. You need a mind that that understands how this I appears and realizes it doesn't exist the way it appears, right? Because the way it appears is a problem. The way it appears, destructive emotions arise, not only in our mind, in the mind of all sentient beings, right? Yeah, so, there's many very powerful quotation. One interesting quotation by the 7th Dalai Lama, where it says, meaning this potential to achieve enlightenment, right? So, meaning the potential to achieve enlightenment is the ultimate nature of our mind, right? So the ultimate nature of our mind and the ultimate nature of the mind of the Buddha is exactly the same. Yeah? So that potential abides in all sentient beings, right? Because all sentient beings' minds are empty of inherent existence. Yeah? So that's what it says in that quotation. It abides in all sentient beings. But not having realized that, sentient beings wander around in samsara. again and again. Yeah, so, and then it says in the last line, I generate bodhicitta for that purpose. It's a very powerful verse because it sees the problem, but also sees the way out of the problem, you see? Yeah, so that potential exists in all of us and in all sentient beings, right? And we see if you don't realize that potential, there's a problem, but you can help sentient beings to realize it. Yeah, so that's a very powerful verse. And for that purpose, I like to become a Buddha. That's what the seventh Dalai Lama says in that verse. It's a very, very moving verse. Great meaning, you know. Yeah. So for that purpose, we need a mind that is capable of understanding reality. So in order to understand reality, we have to have wisdom, right? Analyzing, right? We need kind of clarity and an analytical approach. Does the I exist the way it appears or not, right? And in order to contemplate like that, we need concentration, you know? Without concentration, it's very, you know, we get distracted. Same if you read a book, but the mind is going somewhere else in the valley, in Somerset, or in the valleys or the river. There's a beautiful river there also. I was staying with Judy once. And her son came and he walked. I didn't see the river that time. So, yeah, beautiful place. So then, meaning that, you know, in order to analyze things, we need kind of logic which is based on wisdom with a stable mind. Yeah? If the mind is just wandered around all the time, you know, then it's very difficult to move forward in your meditation. So you need concentration. So that's why the last two perfections are needed, you know. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the introduction to the 6 perfections. Then you would be promised to have a break halfway through, right? So maybe there's now time for the break. So if you break for, let's say, 20 minutes, is that enough? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, so we meet again, what is it, 4:25? Yeah? Okay, 25. And then probably we do a little meditation on bodhicitta, and then we go over the 6 perfections. Yeah, that's just the introduction. Yeah, okay? Okay, enjoy your break, cup of tea, coffee. Make sure the mind is fresh. Very important to be fresh. We have a new camera, so it's a bit fresh now. I have to make sure I shave well. Yeah. Okay, see you in a few minutes' time. Okay, enjoy your break. See you soon. Yeah. So it's a little bit more reality, but it's still what you see on the screen is not me. Yeah. It's just a picture, a zoom image. Yeah, so before we start, try to make sure we have the correct motivation as we started with in the previous session for the benefit of all sentient beings generating bodhicitta. Yeah, so I thought maybe we do a short meditation. People want to or not? I don't know. Yeah. So, we discussed the 6 cause and effect method. So that's one particular aspect of the training, right? That people can put into practice. But it's also another technique. Maybe we go over that, and that's the technique of exchanging self for others. So in one aspect, as we discussed this, I would almost say this morning, but in the previous session, is that you know, we have to get close to sentient beings, right? In order to have these 2 aspects of compassion focused upon sentient beings, and the wisdom focused upon enlightenment, right? So that's 7 cause and effect method, as most of you have studied, I suppose, and we discussed briefly before the break. That 6 cause and effect method, so to say, is one particular aspect of the mind training. Yeah, we can have bodhicitta like a king, right? So meaning, if you are a Buddha, you can really benefit if you have the capacity to influence people, right? Like politicians, they have a lot of power, you know. So if there's a politician who is very well motivated, he or she can do a lot for society, right? If he's not well motivated, then there can be a problem, you know. So you can imagine the more capacity you have to influence others, and you have the power and capacity also of these states of mind that are very powerful, then it can bring great benefit, right? So that's the king-like bodhicitta. First you become a king, then you do something, right? Yeah, so that's kind of the 6 cause and effect method, as we just discussed, is kind of the king-like approach, right? But to enhance aspects of loving kindness and compassion, to make that stronger, we have 2 other types of bodhicitta, which is kind of like the shepherd and like the boatsman, you know. So the shepherd is first all the sheep in the pen, and then the shepherd himself goes home, right? Yeah. So straight away think about my story about in the lake, in the Peak District, where there's all the sheep. You know, so meaning first you take care of others, and then yourself, you know. That's a very powerful mind training. You know, that's kind of the shepherd-like bodhicitta, you know. So that means that is more related with exchanging self for others aspect of generating the mind in that direction, right? The same is true for the boatsman, yeah, that on the boat you go all together, right? You have a crowd on the boat, and then you go together to the shore of liberation or shore of enlightenment, you know? So you go together. Yeah? So you can imagine that the king's-like approach, you know, is from the point of view of the result of Buddhahood, a very sophisticated kind of approach, right? Because if you can influence many beings, like His Holiness Dalai Lama being famous and can do a lot about, you know, education of the mind in different organizations, for example, right? So we are not capable of doing that, you know. So that means if you have more influence, you can do much more benefit. Yeah? So that's why the king-like bodhicitta is eventually, that's what we have to acquire, right? That's eventually we have to obtain. But to enhance the trainings before that king-like, which actually the king-like bodhicitta is kind of the result, right? Yeah, or it's kind of, you have the 6 courses running from seeing sentient beings as your mother, right? Remembering their kindness, repay their kindness, loving kindness, and compassion, right? So there are the kind of the fuels to produce, yeah? And then you come to the special intention, which is the substantial cause for one of the 2 aspirations of bodhicitta, the substantial cause for the wish to free sentient beings from the suffering. But then the other aspiration, as we discussed, is aspiration that you want to accomplish the state of enlightenment for that purpose, right? We said there's 2 aspirations, right? One causal and one resultant. So the causal aspiration, meaning the great compassion of special intention, the wish and the responsibility to free sentient beings from that suffering, right? And then the other aspiration, the resultant aspiration, is I want to become a Buddha for the benefit of purpose, to liberate sentient beings. So that resultant cause or aspiration is in reference to this king-like approach, right? You see that? So the result of the 6 cause and effect is kind of the king-like approach, right? But in order to enhance the 6 causes for that to happen, okay, especially love and kindness and compassion, for that purpose we have exchanging self for others. Yeah? And there's also a combination of different points, sometimes about 13, sometimes 11 points, to combine the 2 methods together. Yeah, they can be very powerful. Or one meditation you spend on the 7 causes and effects, another meditation you spend exchanging self for others. Yeah? So then exchanging self for others talks about an equanimity, which is slightly different than the previous one. Because here the equanimity talks about seeing all sentient beings as equal from the point of view of wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. Yeah. Well, the equanimity from the point of view of the 7 cause and effect methods, the preliminary to that, right, preparing the field, so to say, is more an equanimity between friend, enemy, and stranger, and see that they change. Yeah. And in that regard, seeing they are equal. Right? So the equanimity in the exchanging self for others is understanding, you know, that all beings want happiness, not want suffering, right? They're equal in that regard. Then the next step is to see that the self-cherishing attitude, and we already talked a little bit about, you know, this egoistic approach or self-centeredness, right? That actually, that's the real cause for, you know, suffering. Yeah. So a person who is very self-centered and always talk about me, myself, and I, you know, like De La Soul, they had a kind of rap song, me, myself, and I. They went over and over again. That's what they do in rap, you know. So, but that particular self-concern, you know, to thinking more about yourself as of others, that actually causes a lot of problems, as I said in scientific findings we can see, you know, as I mentioned. And also from a subjective point of view, just experience, right? If you only think about myself, my food, my this, my that, my car, that's this very short-sighted mind that causes a lot of suffering. If you meet wealthy people, for example, in India, I met many people, some very wealthy, some very depressed because of that, and some being so kind of open-minded, generous, you know, organize all kind of schools and hospitals, and you know. Then you meet those people and you straight away see there's an incredible difference in the mental experience of wealth. You know? People very self-centered, you know, want to keep, first of all, they want more wealth, you know, they want more money, then they're afraid to lose it, you know, and they want to guard it. You know? So that's kind of so much suffering. Well, people who are not that kind of self-centered and share, if you meet them, talk with them, straight away you see there's a difference. You know? So also on a personal level, you can see, it's very easy to see that if you only think about I, me, myself, then it's very narrow-minded, and because of the narrow-minded mind, it fuels all kind of destructive emotions. Anger will be stronger, attachment will be stronger. You know? So you can see that from a personal experience as well, you know. Yeah. So that's what you try to contemplate, that the self-cherishing attitude is actually a cause for suffering, you know. Well, cherishing others, you know, is if you do it correctly, it makes the mind so peaceful. You know, it's a greater purpose in life, so to say. You know, if you only think about yourself, it's kind of very short-sighted. This is one being, right? So if you think about others, then you can see, you know, people where I just mentioned, people who are wealthy and help others. You know, we can see in the news, for example, you know, if a person that struck me, it's like, I don't know exactly where I was. I use it as an example quite often because it's very clear. A few people outside of a person's apartment talking in the middle of the night, you know, and this person couldn't sleep, get out and said, you people stop talking. And they didn't stop. And then he get out again, got even more angry, go somewhere else. And then they didn't go somewhere else and he shot him. You know? So they can see out of anger what incredible destruction came because of my space, you talking, I don't like, you see? Big problem. Yeah? So you can see this I was incredible, strong in the mind of the person who committed this crime, right? So then on the same time, by the news, there was a BBC reporter who gave his own shoes away to one of the migrants in India who had to walk for 2,000 kilometers in order to reach home during the lockdown. This is straight away you see, wow, that's amazing. You know, everybody feels good with that kind of thing, right? You see? And the energy is kind of think about yourself or think about others. You see the difference? Yeah. So that summarizes basically with two very clear examples the results of self-cherishing attitude and the results of cherishing others, right? Yeah. So maybe we contemplate that, yeah, for a few minutes, yeah. So when you do meditation, then, well, I said, yeah, where we discussed also concentration and wisdom is very important. So that means that the mind has to be concentrated. In order to let the mind concentrate, we count the breath, right? So the breath is always with us and becomes the object of concentration. So if you count your breath and then while counting, you know, you try not to think about past and future, because that's most of the time our mind is occupied with past and future, right? So now we only think about what you are doing is concentrating on the object of concentration, which is the breath. We count from 1 to 10 and then start over counting. So that becomes an object of concentration. If you do that well, you train your concentration, right? If you train well in concentration, it brings more awareness in the mind. So the more awareness you have, the easier it will be to recognize disturbance of mind. And easier it will be to be in control of the mind. So that's why this kind of simple counting of the breath, concentration meditation can bring great benefits, Yeah, so that's why we do that. But the main aim is, of course, is to generate concentration. Yeah. Then the analytical meditation we're going to do is to contemplate the points we just discussed, to analyze. If it's true, do all sentient beings want happiness, not want suffering? Check. If it's true, if that self-cherishing attitude is cause for suffering. If it's true that cherishing others is a cause for happiness or not. Think about those examples we just discussed. And then come to a conclusion, and then focus on that conclusion, right? So that's kind of a meditation technique to move the mind in a particular positive habituation, right? So the more you habituate your mind in that direction, then slowly your mind becomes convinced about that real reality, and then you develop this kind of good qualities of mind, right? Yeah. And that, if you combine it with a visualization of Sakyamuni Buddha, for those who feel comfortable, a few of you are studying, discovering Buddhism, a few of you already did quite some things more in Buddhism. So if you feel free, if you feel comfortable, you can visualize Sakyamuni Buddha in front, and then otherwise just white light, the nature of love and kindness and compassion, right? So then from the heart of Sakyamuni Buddha comes white light, and that purifies. There's a purification aspect, as well as eliminating all obstacles. And in particular, the obstacle for the realization to come about of that particular subject we're going to concentrate upon, which is the self-cherishing attitude being cause for suffering, and cherishing others being cause for happiness, right? So you think that you purify all obscurations and negative karma, and in particular, obscuration that stands the realization of bodhicitta in the way. That gets kind of pacified. Then there's yellow golden nectar light, do after, and that establishes the right conditions or the blessings for the realization to come about. All the realization in general, and in particular, the realization of bodhicitta. Yeah? Yeah? People okay? People ready to sit? Some people outside, some people inside, some people halfway, some people with a picture behind. Yeah. So as long as you, make sure you're comfortable, but the spine should be straight, right? I think I discussed a few times earlier. And the head is slightly bent forward. The eyes are just, the eyelids about to be closed, not completely. A little bit of light goes in, but not that you can see things. It's a particular technique to keep the mind fresh. Your hands, you can just put the right on top of the left in your lap, right? So you can sit like that. It makes the shoulders more comfortable, and the upper part of the body. And yeah, so then if you sit like that, then we start with the counting of the breath. So, counting is easy. So we count from 1 to 10. Every in-breath is 1, out-breath is 2, in-breath is 3, and count from 1 to 10, and then start over counting, right? And make sure the mind is only doing one thing, and not thinking about past and future, but only counting the breath. Yeah? So let's do that for about a minute or two. So then when the mind is settled down a bit, then imagine Sakyamuni Buddha in front, throne supported by snow lions, and there's a lotus, sun and moon disk. On top of that is Sakyamuni Buddha seated in full lotus position, right hand and his right knee touching the moon disc, and left holds a begging bowl filled with nectar. And he wears the robes of a fully ordained monk, and his whole body is made out of the golden nectar light, and he has a very beautiful and peaceful face. Yeah. So visualize it in front, about a body's length away to the level of your eyebrows in front of yourself. And then surrounding yourself, imagine all sentient beings of the 6 realms, infinite, countless in human aspect, and they're undergoing the individual sufferings, and think, without generating bodhicitta, I will not be able to help them. So that's why I'm here. And then with that intention, make request to the Buddha in front, and the Buddha is very pleased, and then from his heart comes white light to the crown of your head and the crown of all sentient beings, and purifies everybody, and takes away all obstacles, sickness, life, obstacles, washed away, and all the obstacles for the realization to come about, and in particular, the realization of bodhicitta. Right? We do this visualization of the white light from the heart of Sakyamuni Buddha, the crown of your head, filling your whole body for about, let's say, 1 or 2 minutes. So now think you're completely filled with this white nectar light and completely purified, and all obstacles being completely pacified. Then with the same attention, focus upon the suffering sentient beings, make rest to the Buddha, and then from his heart comes yellow golden nectar light, and that goes to the crown of all sentient beings, including yourself, and by this you get the right potentials for the blessings, for the realizations to come about, and in particular, the realization of bodhicitta. Yeah, so also this visualization of the golden nectar light from his heart to the crown of your head, filling your whole body, we do also for about 2 minutes. So now think your whole body is filled with this golden nectar light, and the mind is completely suitable just before the realization to come about. That kind of mind has been generated. And then we're gonna contemplate the points as we discussed. So first, try to see that the strong wish or happiness that you have, whenever you're happy, you keep it. You want to keep it. When you feel a bit down or some physical suffering, you want to be separated from that as soon as possible, right? So that wish exists in all of us, and all sentient beings without exception, right? So try to analyze that it's not only yourself who's experiencing this, but all sentient beings have the same wish, wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. Exactly the same strength, So try to analyze that for about 2 minutes. And then try to see that, analyze, so to say, that if you only think about yourself, self-cherishing attitude, so to say, narrow mind, you know, what kind of feeling does that produce? Or does it really cause destructive emotions to come up? If you only think about yourself and not thinking about others at all, just only about me, myself. See, try to analyze that that's really a cause for strong desire to come up. I need this, I need that. And strong aversion, I don't like this person. Why does this person say this? So try to see that this concrete concept of I and mine, and on top of that, we cherish that, as being the most important thing in the world, on the planet. So try to see that this self-centeredness is actually cause for suffering. It generates destructive emotions. Based on that, we say wrong things to others. We spoil relationships, Yeah, so try to analyze it for about a minute or two. And then try to think, if you cherish others, all those countless sentient beings who have the same wish, wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. If you think about them more than yourself, or see them as more important because they're more in number, then see that the mind becomes much more peaceful, and much more, causes for happiness to be gained. They're more in number, so more causes for happiness. But also people who are more open-minded and thinking about others, they're much more relaxed. The mind is much more at peace. So try to see that for yourself, or try to analyze those points, if it's true or not, for about a minute or two. Then try to come to a kind of conclusion, actually, that sees, based on the first contemplation, that all sentient beings are equal. On the point of view of wanting happiness and wanting suffering, right? And only think about yourself is a cause for suffering. Think about others is a cause for happiness, right? So try to exchange based on those three things we contemplated. Try to exchange with intention. Oh, it's really true. It's maybe time to work for the benefit of others, right? To cherish others. And then focus on that conclusion for about a minute. Or you can take a kind of commitment or prayer or promise, you know, that from now on I'm going to try to, you know, look more at others' importance than myself. Yeah, take that kind of commitment, if you like. Yeah. And to conclude, then Sakyamuni Buddha, who is visualized in front, if you like, he can dissolve the Buddha, meaning he comes to the crown of your head, becomes smaller, and then the throne dissolves into the lotus, and then becomes even smaller, and then descends to the crown of your head, becomes one with your own mind, the level of your heart, completely dissolves there. You can feel a little bit of bliss or happiness there. Yeah, to conclude. All right, now you can stop. So, if you combine the two methods, there's a possibility, right? So then the exchanging self for others will enhance love and kindness and compassion, right? So if you enhance love and kindness and compassion by exchanging self for others, then the other technique that sometimes can be done is the action of giving and taking, right? To take the suffering of others and give away your own happiness. So that can only be real beneficial for the mind, the stronger these understandings are, right? Of love and kindness, compassion, versus exchanging self for others. Because compassion gets enhanced by taking the suffering of others, right? And love and kindness gets enhanced by giving away your own happiness to, and causes for happiness to others. So there's a combination possible as well. Yeah? So some people feel more inclined to do the 7 cause and effect method, so you can focus mainly on that, and some people feel more inclined to do exchanging self for others, so you can also focus on that. But yeah, eventually, if you do both together and sometimes combine them, then it becomes a very sophisticated system, you know. Yeah, so that's the integration of 2 traditions, right, in the Lamrim, that we came from Asanga and that came from Nagarjuna and Kasa and Shantideva, right, exchanging self for others. So yeah, there's 2 methods. So if you combine them, it becomes a very sophisticated part. So then we generate this kind of bodhicitta, or we try, and that's not enough. Yeah, Namdak says, even if you only generate this mind, it's not enough. You have to practice the 6 perfections, right? Or yeah. So we introduced the 6 perfections already. So the first one is the act of giving, right? So perfection means actually something that's perfect, right? So the perfections we engage in is not really perfection, actually, technically speaking. The perfection only exists at the level of Buddhahood, because then everything is perfect. And so we do the practice of the perfection. It's just kind of those who study a bit more. Yeah, so to make a bit more complete picture. So we practice this perfection of giving, morality, patience, you know, efforts and concentration and wisdom, right? And then we saw already the need for that. Why do we do it? You know? Yeah, we discussed that in those 3 categories of eliminating samsara, progressing on the path, and go to the full extent of enlightenment, right? First 2 perfections of giving and morality, opposing samsaric suffering, right? And the cause for that. Well, practicing patience and efforts moves us in a direction, because if you practice patience, then you don't destroy negative karma. Oh, sorry, destroy positive karma, right? So if you practice patience, you prevent it from happening. So you keep going. And if that gets enhanced with effort, then of course, it moves you further on the path. And then eventually you have to realize reality. And for that we need wisdom. And wisdom can only operate with a mind that is not only sharp, but also stable. So we need concentration. So that's why the last two perfections helps us to accomplish our goal, enlightenment. Yeah. So then the perfection of giving, you know, the perfection of giving is, as you see in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara and the different Lamarims, you know, it's kind of a state of mind, a wish to give. That's the main aspect of practicing the perfection of giving, right? And not only you give or you wish to give things, or you actually engage in giving, right? But also the results of that you also dedicate for others, right? It's kind of a Tonglen practice, giving the causes for happiness to others. You know? So that's two aspects there. Lama Tsongkhapa clearly explains. Then there's different aspects of giving. You can give material things, or give a flower. I can give you a virtual flower like that. Yeah. So there's kind of material thing, right? Yeah. Sometimes people say, "Oh, thank you." Virtual acceptance or receiving. Yeah. So now over Zoom it's slightly different, but yeah, that's one aspect, right? Material aspects of giving. Yeah, it can be the giving of food to a beggar or a person who's in need, right? Or some money. When I'm in India, some beggars, they really look in need, you know. So then straight away, it's quite easy to act in that way, you know. In the UK, in the beginning when I first arrived, I found it a bit difficult. Because the people who ask for money, they had all this organization and they just use it for drugs, and you know. So then I found it very difficult. You know? So then I went to Leeds, and then I was standing on the rail station. It was a bit windy and cold and rainy weather, and then all the person asked for a cup of coffee, and I forgot. So I told him, "I'm like, come on, don't be too kind of, you know, in that way." So I gave him a cup. So it's kind of, sometimes our mind is, you see, the first time when I was walking it was near the Vauxhall station, railway station, that the person was, I think was, you know, the face looked like somebody who uses different substances, who asked for something. I thought, yeah, it's going to use for drugs, right? So then I didn't react, kind of. I was a bit kind of, what is this? I was just in the UK. So, yeah, but actually it was just based on self-cherishing attitudes, you see. Yeah, so then I missed out on that occasion to help, you know. So that's the act of generosity, yeah, of material things. But of course, we have to see, we have to see what's beneficial for the person and what's not. One of my own teachers, I always use that example, very clear. He's an abbot. He was abbot of many monasteries, actually, many big monasteries. So he was very low-key, easygoing, no attendant, just by himself in the rickshaw, you know, this kind of scooter. You go into the local village, and he was in local village Kushalangar, that's our local town. And then one of the Indian beggars on the street said, oh, like this on the stomach, hungry. So he needs food. So then Gela, he took him to the restaurant. He gave him a meal. You know? So then the meal was finished, and then the beggar said, chai, you know, that's the Indian form of tea, right? It's like very nice. Some people know already how to make it. If you're used to Indian chai, I tell you, then British tea is not really as it was before. Also food sometimes. Indian food gets really kind of, you know, anyway, that's my stupid attachment in India built up over a few decades. But, you know, he gave him a cup of chai, you know, after the meal. Nice, no? And then the cup of chai was finished. He said, he needed a bedi, this kind of an Indian cigarette, you know, those little brown things. And then my teacher said, no. So you see, that's kind of real kind of thing to deal with the practice of generosity. So there's a kind of material aspect. Yeah. There's also other aspects of generosity, of fearlessness, you know, to save sentient beings from being killed, like an insect almost drawing in a pool of water or something like that, or, you know, you can online help with organizations for the animal rights, for example, you know. So that's kind of the giving of fearlessness. Yeah, or generosity, same thing. It's very easy. You know, I have this incredible app. In India, I was very low key, but here I have an app with a bank account. And then it's very easy to donate something. So easy. But then also it's important, if you do that, to have a complete act, you know. So that means you have a good motivation, good intention, make a strong prayer, and dedication in the end. Yeah. So most of you have studied karma, right? Yeah. So in karma, we talked about 4 aspects that makes karma either very strong or light, right? There's a basis, there's an intention, right? There's a deed, and a final step, right? So also with virtuous act, so when all those factors are complete, karma becomes heavy, right? I think most of you know, right? That studied, when we just studied karma. So with negative karma, it can propel you in negative states of rebirth, same as the 12 links of interdependence. So if 1 or 2 factors are missing or lacking, it doesn't have that potential, right? So that means also with positive deeds, if you do the act of giving, make sure when you give a donation somewhere, if very easy on an app or something, then you know, try to generate correct motivation, right? Have a very strong intention, understand the needs, generate your own motivation, right? Have a good discriminating factor present. Yeah, make sure you don't grasp too much at, oh, I'm doing something good. You know, don't think, don't have a selfish motivation, right? So, and then do the act in the perfect way, and then rejoice and dedicate, you see? So then it becomes a complete act, which has much more potential than just giving, like a beggar on the street in India. Sometimes people just throw some rupees in their lap, but you can also offer with respect, right? Yeah, so that's kind of a more positive thing to be done. Yeah, so that's so then in relation with the intention, I said, don't think about I, me, myself. So that's also very important. When you engage in the act of giving, even in, if you study the Vatakata Sutra, maybe some of you have read the sutra, or maybe a few times, or maybe many times. So then also the Buddha said, you know, it's important to see the act of giving and the person who gives and the objects or the person you give towards to. All those 3 are empty of inherent nature. They don't exist from their own side. They're there by the power of interdependence, right? So if you have that kind of discriminating factor, then strong grasping is not present, right? So the action becomes more complete. Yeah, so that's very clearly not only explained by the Buddha in the sutras, but also in the commentaries on the perfection of giving, right? So we see the giver, the action, and the person we give towards to, and in the action includes the object, right? They all empty of inherent existence. They're merely there by mere imputation, by the mind, right? It's kind of, interdependence. So understanding that aspect, and then you do engage in the act of giving, becomes a much more superior practice. And also when you dedicate, you should always think that you making dedication itself, and the aim you dedicate towards to, right? Those 3 also basically are in the nature of interdependence, right? Depend on cause and conditions. They don't exist all by 3 individual things by themselves, right? So if you have that discriminating factor, then this dedication becomes much more profound. Yeah? And then the result will come, of course, about. Yeah, there's a few important things with act of giving as well. And yeah, so we discussed the act of giving of material things, act of giving of fearlessness, right? Saving animals, you know? Yeah, so you can do that also, helping organizations, you know, who stop, you know, help out with animal rights or human rights, for example. It's also fearlessness, right? To help to stop war or to help to stop kind of harmful things. It's fearlessness, the giving of fearlessness, right? That's 2 things, yeah? Material things and fearlessness. Then there's the most superior one is the act of giving of the Dharma, or, you know, that changes people's mind in a positive way, right? Because if you do the act of physical giving of wealth, you know, or money, or food, there's no end. There's no end. You cannot stop. You think, oh, now everybody has enough. That will never happen, right? As long as people wander around in samsara. But if you have the gift, the act of the Dharma, or positive advice to people who are in depression. Listen to them, talk with them, go for a walk with them, help them, you know. That's actually more precious than a physical thing or a present or a meal, you know. To show an example, when I was a monk for quite some years, then I went back to the Netherlands once every 4 or 5 years for visa purpose. So every time I was in the West, I want to go back as soon as possible to my monastery. So yeah, now the karma changed a bit. Now I'm perfectly happy here in Jamyang. Yeah, so something changed. But when I was in that time, then my aunt had a birthday party, and as a monk, you know, you don't really hang out on parties normally, you know. So I was thinking, what do I do? You know, they're not Buddhists, they don't really understand what I'm doing. You know, they know only, you know, not much. So maybe I should just go and just see what happens and talk with people, and see everybody, and then say hello. Maybe it's boring for me, but for them maybe it's nice. So I went, and I was sitting in a corner one moment of time, and my aunt talking. I talked about, and she had questions about mind and, you know, emotions. And so we talked. I think maybe 15 minutes. 15 minutes. So then all people presents and cake, and you know how it is. So there's a difference between material things and Dharma, right? So then I came back home. I stayed with my mother. So I went back, and then she called me, and then also she sent an email saying, "That's the first birthday I found really beneficial." I mean, say, there's the first birthday I think that was meaningful, she said. That's what she said, meaningful. Interesting, right? So that means that this kind of aspects of mind training gives real satisfaction, right? That gives some real kind of richness, or you know, we can say sometimes India is very poor, material, now it's changing, but from the point of view of mind training, very rich, you know, this heritage of different forms of faith, you know. So yeah, so that's, you can see the difference, right? Yeah, so that the act of Dharma is more superior. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one of the spiritual directors, so to say, of Jamyang and other centers at PMT, it's very interesting sometimes. Then he saves the sheep from being slaughtered, right? Then he gives them fresh grass, and then he puts them in front of himself, put a little desk, and then he recites sutra to them, you know? So they put imprints in the ears, in the consciousness, you know? So that means there's an act of giving of fearlessness, you know, save them from being slaughtered, right? Then material things, give them some fresh grass, you know? And then give them the Dharma. And also if you read, for example, a famous sutra, the Golden Light Sutra, I think some of you have read a few times. Yeah. So there's also this story about saving the fish in the lake, right? When the Buddha was a bodhisattva, he makes sure the fish has water, then he feed them with food, and then he taught them the Dharma, right? And then they all die, and then they were born in the God realms because of having heard the Dharma, you see? Yeah, so that's the complete aspect of those three aspects of giving, right? Yeah. So that's the act of giving. Yeah. Then the act of morality, or the perfection of morality, you know, it's very logical. You know, we all want happiness, don't want suffering. So that means that if we engage in negativity, it harms a person, right? And we don't like to harm a person, so it makes sense to avoid that activity of harming others, right? Yeah, that's what the Buddha called morality, right? And the Buddha also said, from the act of giving, wealth will come, or enjoyments will come, right? From the act of morality, peace comes, happiness. So, Timbalonji Timkite, that is the Tibetan scripture, or I mean, the quote from the sutra, yeah, that wealth, or the act of giving, gives happiness, or actually longje means enjoyment or prosperity, right? People who give a lot, they receive. People who hold on, then they lose sometimes. It's not pervading, it's not always the case, but I mean, it's similar with butter. If you have butter in your hand, and you keep like that, it stays, right? But if you squeeze it, it goes, you know? So, yeah. It's a bit like that. So, but morality is happiness. Why is it happiness? Because you prevent the cause for suffering, right? You see that? You take away the cause for suffering, so that's the cause for happiness. There's the logic behind it. So some people who are around, people who practice morality, even if they're not interested in Buddhism at all, even if they're skeptical, they still feel something, some energy, or say, oh, I always tell the story about a Dutch film crew who came once to film what I was doing. Because not everybody in the Netherlands shaves their head and walks around like this in some monastery in South India, right? So they thought, oh, that's something different. So they check me out in an interview, make sure I'm a stable guy, and then they invest in the team. They film. So then they saw many places on the planet, you know? They went to many places, everywhere. And they were not interested in Buddhism at all. They came in my room and they saw all the photographs, and there's no photo of family or only Buddhas, you know? So they say, oh, you're really into it, right? I say, so I said, yes, I am, I think. So but anyway, so then to cut short, so they were very busy for a few days, but then after the filming, they told me, we've been many places, we've been busy often, but we never felt a little peace of mind. The experience here, very interesting. Because we live in a monastery with thousands of monks, right, monastics. In the area we also have nunneries, and so they practice this morality. You know? So many people say that when they come and visit, they feel kind of peace of mind. Very interesting, you know. Yeah, so that's the practice of morality. So there's different aspects of morality, right? So there's the morality of negative deeds, to abandon negative deeds, right? Because that causes suffering. So that's the reason why morality brings happiness. So morality, also a government or a country, they need rules, right? Without rules, it becomes a mess. Right? Some people don't, some rules, of course, not every rule is perfect, we know that, but you know, you need kind of discipline. If you see if you see traffic here and the traffic in the city as Bangalore, for example, in South India, there's a difference how the traffic is organized. And, you know, that's results, you know. So that means if things have rules and the rules are followed, things go very smooth and peaceful. Like here in London, for example, when I tell my classmates, it's quieter than any small Indian town, or it's quieter than even the monastery. So, because it's kind of discipline, you know? It's kind of, yeah, it's kind of different. In India, everybody uses, you know, will know the person in front, he's behind. So they use the horn all the time. Even on the trucks, on the back of the trucks, you know, they have this quote, horn please. At night, use a dipper, meaning using the light, you know, at night, they a little bit quiet maybe, but yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, those who have been in India, they know what I'm talking about. Other people think, what is he talking about now? Mm-hmm. But anyway, so that means if there's a kind of morality or discipline, it brings a kind of structure in society and also a structure in our mind, right? That's what we need. If our mind is not structured, it's very easy to get distracted and do all kinds of things and waste time and create causes for suffering instead of causes for happiness. So we need a structure in our life, right? So that's, the Buddha said, okay, if you want happiness, don't want suffering, practice morality. Yeah, so that's also the main cause for practicing rebirth, is the practice of morality, right? So it means you abandon negative deeds, yeah, and you practice virtue. So if you abandon the 10 non-virtues, then automatically it implies you practice the 10 virtues, right? So abandoning negative deeds is one, practicing virtue is the second morality, and then because it's a perfection of, you know, the bodhisattva vehicle, so then the third one is to benefit beings, right? The perfection of morality of benefit beings. So when you read the Foundation of All Good Qualities, you know, it's very, very good text. It's one of the best short lamrims you can imagine, right? So if you read it on a daily basis, it's very profound. It's holiness recite every day. Foundation of All Good Qualities. It's a complete presentation of the lamrim in just one verse for each subject. So then you also see, it says, even if you have generated bodhicitta, but if you do not practice the 3 types of morality, you will not achieve enlightenment, it says. And so the three types of morality is actually these three we just talked about. Abandon negative deeds, practicing virtue, and working for the benefit of sentient beings. So that's the perfection of morality, right? Yeah. Then, of course, that's by itself is not easy. Yeah, to practice morality, we know it's not easy. You know? To practice morality of the physical and verbal aspects, not killing, not stealing, not lying. That's easier than not to have a harmful thought or a negative thought to a person, right? So to have a negative thought to a person, it's much more difficult to not let come up than not to shout at a person, right? Yeah, so not shouting at a person is easier. So that's why the Buddha also said first, practice the morality of the physical aspects, then practice morality of the verbal aspects, then practice the morality of the mental aspects. Yeah, so that's also why we have the 10 non-virtues classified in the same way, right? First, negatives of the body, negativities of the speech, and then the negativities of the mind, right? So there's a kind of sequence there. The same sequence of easier and more difficult is also in the 6 perfections. Yeah, it's easier to practice generosity than it is to realize emptiness, right? Yeah, so there's a sequence there as well of easier practices, and so the Buddha very skillful, And then, because if you practice generosity, you create kind of incredible conditions, right? Then that together with morality is the perfect combination for practice human rebirth, right? But then, if you do that for a long period of time and you get angry again, then it's kind of, 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Because anger has the potential to destroy positive potential, right? It has the, it can, when there's real strong, innate, strong, manifest anger, it can really, destroy positive potentials created over a long period of time, which is by itself very difficult. So if you destroy it, then you have to start all over again, right? Same if you build a sand castle and somebody walks over your sand castle, right? If you're a little child, you have done that maybe on the beach. I did that in the Netherlands, building things. Or building forms of humans or something like that, Yeah, so it takes time, right, to build. But then if somebody just comes there, steps over it and, oh, sorry, and then it goes, you have to fix it again, right? So same thing, If you do all these practices and then anger takes over and then there goes your positive potential, right? Yeah. So that's why you have to practice patience, very important. And Shantideva puts a lot of emphasis on that because if you practice patience, then you move forward, right? You purify negative karma you've accumulated in the past, you practice patience, you engage in virtue, there's only a way forward, right? You never fall back again, you see? That's why practicing patience is so important. Right? And that's from the point of view of the path, but just on a daily basis, you prevent so much suffering. If you're in traffic or public transport, now it's a bit not that busy, but sometimes it gets really busy, right? In traffic or public transport, and then some people get really irritated when their time is being taken away, or it takes more time to get home because other people are in front. So they get so uptight, and then the whole evening is gone. They walk the whole day, they're tired, they want to go home, and then they get fed up, and then they get angry, and then the whole evening is gone. It's wasted. Well, they didn't change the situation with getting angry, because the person in front is still there. There's nothing to do about it. Yeah. So that means practicing patience is also in day-to-day life. It's great benefits, right? Yeah. With time, and I'd always talk about stories in India with trains being late. My record, I told you before, my record is 32 hours delay in a train. And so then I booked a record of 82 hours in the train from starting point of Bangalore to my destination in Gaya. Because normally you can do it quicker, but that train was 32 hours delayed. Yeah, so that's my record. But then people, okay, no problem. But then, when I went to Somerset last year, and then there was this great southwest, I think, right? Great southern western, not southern western railways, but or western railways maybe just, yeah. Not western railways, but great western railways. So I learned in the first year and being in the UK, every direction of the country has its own kind of name for a train company or something like that, right? Right? Yeah. So then this train was 1 minute. 1 minute, can you imagine? 1 minute delayed. You on this bridge just before the station and say, "Oh, sorry, I have to apologize." You know, so sometimes people they get annoyed by 1 or 2 minutes. You see, and it doesn't change the situation. It's not always true because when I came back from Leeds one evening, then the train was more than a minute. I think it was an hour or something. But that time, I had very easygoing people in the same couch. You know, the couch numbers were mixed up. So everybody just said, okay, it's Sunday, you know. I thought, okay, that's normal. Yeah, okay, no problem. Yeah. So of course, there are people also like that. Yeah. But you can imagine if you get really uptight, you don't change the situation. On top of the difficulty of being late, you also have more suffering of the mind, right? So you only have yourself. Yeah. So that's kind of the drawbacks of irritation and anger. You know? Yeah. So that's why, and it has the potential. That's from the point of view of the perfection. Has the potential to destroy positive karma, right? So that's the most dangerous one, you know? Yeah, because then you don't move forward, right? So that's, in order to move forward, Lama Tsongkhapa says, patience and effort are extremely important. Yeah, so then what kind of patience do we have? Patience towards people who harm you, or people who say nasty things to you, right? Yeah, so that's a kind of, yeah, I mean, if people say nasty things to you or send you a nasty message, right? Actually, that message or the words doesn't really physically harm, right? Right? It doesn't really physically harm. You know? It's your attitude that actually harms, right? How do you react? That's actually the problem. See? Yeah. So if people harm you, then in that way, you should contemplate actually what is the real harm. Yeah. So Shantideva is very clear. If you read the practice, the chapter on patience, it's amazing. Very strong logic. You know, what actually is harming you. You know? Yeah. And then, so you practice patience with that. And then, of course, that doesn't mean people can do whatever they like. You know, many people misunderstand this aspect of practice of patience. They think if you practice patience, you just sit and everybody can do whatever they like, and you're just like, oh, yeah, so this kind of attitude. But that's actually not real patience, you know. That's not a real thing. Even His Holiness is very direct. Once we organized a public talk of His Holiness in one, I won't mention the name of the university, but in one place, a few hours drive from the monastery. And in this city, we had a connection with the university, and we organized a few actually, but there was one public talk from His Holiness, and it was a government university, so there was kind of a lot of official aspects, you know, politicians getting involved, and then you know what happens when politicians get involved. It's kind of, you know, different. Yeah. So they start felicitating each other just, you know, for money and name and fame. So they went on and on and on and on. And then it was time for His Holiness to speak, and then His Holiness says, too much formality, waste of time. Just in front of everybody, His Holiness said it. You know? So that means that though inside His Holiness is in complete control, you know, there's no kind of irritation, but he just made a message clear, right? So it's very interesting to see that a person like His Holiness being always so compassionate and so full of patience, never getting uptight, or even with the Chinese, you know. But then when something has to be said, His Holiness says. You know, you see that? It's a very interesting example. Yeah. So patience doesn't mean, the patience means the mind is full of peace, but still you can act, right? With a correct motivation for the benefit of future development, you act, or a teacher, or father or mother for the child, right? You can say things, and even you can put up a little bit of fierce expression on your face without having anger inside to make the message clear, right? Yeah, so that's kind of the real practice of patience. You see that? Yeah. And then also, yeah, in this case, towards harmful beings in that way. You can say, oh, don't do that, you know, or you can say why, and try to explain, but don't get uptight, don't get irritated, because that gives the mind on clarity, and you make the wrong decision, and then the outcome is never really positive or perfect. But if the mind is calm, in control, and you make a decision, you say something, like with this example of Holiness, there's benefit, right? You see that? Yeah, so that's the real practice of patience, you know? Yeah. In regards with harmful actions of others. Yeah, that's the first one. The second one is suffering. Sometimes we suffer physically or mentally, and then it's kind of, oh, this again, and then we get even uptight, you know. So why me all the time, we say, you know. So that means that to have a depression or to physically have a sickness, right? If the mind is strong, you can get out of it, or you can, you know, you can actually, with sickness, you can deal with it much better, you know. So it also says that people with a positive intention or a positive kind of, you know, optimistic view of the world, so to say, their sickness cures much better and quicker than a person with a negative view of the world. It's been researched, you know? Very interesting. So if you have a suffering and you cannot do anything about it, then also don't worry about it and get uptight, because you cannot do anything about it anyway, right? See that? That's a very interesting aspect of suffering. And another aspect of suffering is, you know, it purifies, right? So it's an incredible opportunity when you're sick or somebody says something nasty to you and get disturbed. It's an amazing opportunity to purify negative karma, you see? So that's very fortunate, you know? And then if a person criticizes you, you know, that opportunity is so precious, because if you really want to understand emptiness, you have to understand how the I appears, right? How the I appears, you know? So if a person criticizes you and says something nasty to you, it's so amazing. That person is actually very kind, because your teacher or a course you follow, they will tell you, oh, it appears like this and appears like that, and then you apply this kind of reasoning. It's very precious, but if you don't recognize the object of recognition or refutation, then you never get it. You just get it in an intellectual way, but as an experience, you never get it. So a person who criticizes you is like, oh, there it appears, you see? Oh, dare this person say this to me? I'm not like that. So that's an incredible moment. So instead of blowing up, and, you know, acting to that person with anger, and the whole thing escalates and becomes worse, you know, if you practice patience, say, yeah, okay, and then just quiet, disappear, you know. So and then meditate on how I appears. Very interesting. So that person is actually very, very, very clever. You know? And we know, you know, if there's one person acting out of anger, the other person acting out of anger as well, it escalates, right? It even ends up in war. But when one person is irritating and another person relaxes and calm and tries to think about how to react, and then it slowly fades away. You know? It's even with street dogs in India, I saw many times. When there's one dog coming in new territory, all the dogs of the territory start barking and fighting, and they bite and everywhere, you know. It's kind of a mess if you see the dogs fighting. It's beyond control. You know, it's crazy. But then sometimes one dog comes, and then the other dogs start barking, and this new dog comes in and says, ooh, and the wags his tail, and the other dogs, what's this? What's this? And then they stop barking and start to sniff him, and then within a few minutes they play with each other. You see? So even in the animal realm, there's a kind of, you know, cause and effect relationships between anger or having a more playful mind, you see? Yeah, yeah, so that's towards harmful beings and towards one's own suffering, you know, because if you suffer, then that's this quote of Shantideva, right? If you have a problem and you can do something about it, do something, you know, don't worry, do it. If you have a problem but you cannot solve it, like a sickness on a particular time, or things that come with old age, right? The older we get, things become more difficult, you know. A few of you probably have experienced that, you know, you need kind of things on your, you know, it's like glasses. You know, your eyes have to be adjusted, I've been told. It didn't tell me, you're getting old, your eyes are degenerating, you need glasses. They didn't say that. But that's reality. But they said, oh, sir, yeah, after that age, your eyes have to be adjusted, they told me. You know, very interesting comment. Yeah, very nice doctor in Mysore. Yeah. Yeah. So that means that if you understand suffering, it's easier to practice patience, right? Because if you have a problem in life and you cannot solve it, like old age or the suffering of a sickness, then there's no point in worrying about it because you have to deal with it, right? So you have to accept it, you know? And that's so much freedom by just that thought, you know? So it saves a lot of mental suffering. Yeah, it's towards suffering. And then the third one of practicing patience is towards the Dharma or spiritual progress, so to say. Yeah, so to achieve the realizations, you undergo hardships normally. Yeah, so we in Zoom are very comfortable in the room, and you know, it's kind of in the West. There's almost no hardships involved, right? If you're thirsty, a cup of tea or something with you. You know, if you really study how the masters of the past, how much hardships they went through in Tibet, and then after leaving Tibet and Baksa, you know, so difficult. In prison even, you know, they just kept working for the benefit. Or when they came to India to fight all the elephants who came and destroyed things, you know? Not fighting like with the fists, but with poles, with fire to keep them away, you know. Yeah. So so much hardships, you know. So then we Westerners, like we in the West, it's like the spoon is just being put in front. We only have to chew. Here's the Dharma. Yeah, you can take it if you want. You know, it's kind of the way we are at the moment. You know, yeah. And then we do retreat, and then it's kind of, oh, so difficult. But you know, you have to practice patience with hardships, right? Difficulties. You know, or we study in an emptiness. Oh, so difficult. Oh, so difficult. Maybe I don't do it. But you know, even if it's difficult and you go through it, it's a purification, right? It clears all this dirt out of the mind. You see? Yeah. Also, the Buddha said that. You know, in the Vajrayana Sutra, it says that some people who read the sutra, they get unhappy or they experience some suffering. And then the Buddha said, it's a very good sign, very good sign. Because there's a sign of purification. Negative karma gets exhausted, you see. Yeah. So the same way, a little bit of hardship, you know, in the Dharma. Yeah. I didn't undergo hardships, but I remember when we were just holding these teachings in the early days in Dharamshala, when there was no roof, we were just sitting outside. And Dharamshala, mostly the teachings were around February, and there's always wet snow or rain or wind or a combination of the three. You know, so sometimes we sit with clothes and then an umbrella because it was raining, you know, so outside the umbrella. Yeah. And then once there was they made this huge kind of structure, metal structure, so they put plastic on top. But then when it rains, you know, the plastic gathers all the water, right? And then once in a while, you hear like 10 people making noise, you know, in your back, because the water came down. You know? So that's how we sometimes do sitting. Very interesting. Yeah. But yeah, then if you see it as a kind of, you know, aspect, even the mind is happy. It's no issue. Or with a train example, right? If you have a problem, then if you worry about it, then mentally it becomes difficult. But if you can even enjoy those difficulties, right? And there's no difference. Same with parties in the early days. When we were young, we went to these all night long parties, right? So there was, because of the mind, oh, nice. You know, then there's no hardship, right? So for the Dharma, same thing. I mean, the Dharma and spiritual progress we do to develop, right? So whatever difficulty comes with that, we should be happy, because that purifies negative karma, meaning we're progressing, you know? Yeah, so if you do purification practice, for example, and you get sick, of course you have to take care of your sickness, but generally speaking, a very good sign, because it's a sign of purification, you see? Yeah, so there's many aspects you can see of practicing patience, right? Yeah, so and then by undergoing hardships, there's a purification, right? Undergoing the sickness, there's a purification. when somebody harms you, the purification. So negative karma actually gets exhausted. Yeah. Yeah. Then Lama Tsongkhapa, or yeah, maybe I have to look at the time. Yeah. So there's 5 qualities also of practicing patience. Lama Tsongkhapa says very interesting. Just to make it complete. So if you, especially in relation with practice based towards suffering, it's so amazing because when you experience suffering, it helps you to understand the suffering of samsara, right? So it's amazing, right? That's one thing. Then another thing we talked about is purification, right? And there's suffering experience is a kind of purification because negative karma gets to ripening, and that ripens in the form of suffering, right? So that's purification. Yeah? And because of that, it prevents suffering in the future. That's number 3, Lama Tsongkhapa says. Then, you know, and that establishes causes for happiness, because the more suffering has been purified, the more cause for happiness will remain, right? The more dirt is being taken out, the more, you know, clarity is there. Yeah? And then it stops pride, he said. It's a very good one. If you people who are suffering or physical, you know, the pride doesn't come up. So yeah, it's 5 anyway. If you read Lamrim Chenmo, then you can find them back, or other Lamrim sometimes. So then effort. Yeah, if you don't have effort, then you won't progress. So you need effort. And effort is, what is effort? Effort is not like walking, like a manager, you know. Like what is it, 12 hours a day or something, or 13 hours, 14 hours a day. Some people do that, right? It's not classified as effort as we describe it. Effort as we describe it is pleasure in virtue, right? It's amazing, isn't it? If you enjoy doing virtue, that's effort. And that means then there's no difficulty at all. Enjoy, you know? So that's amazing. Kind of everything that we enjoy is not difficult. Yeah. So that means that if you enjoy studying, if you enjoy contemplating, if you're enjoying helping others, you know, then there's no hardship, right? So that's amazing. Yeah. So then effort being defined like that, there's different types of effort. It's like a harness or a more, you know, protection for the benefit even one sentient being. You walk, you know, benefit. So that's kind of yeah, the first one. Then towards virtue, of course, right? The more efforts we put in virtue activities, the more accumulation of merit happens, the quicker we become developed. Yeah? So we need accumulation of merit, purify negative deeds in order to progress, right, on the path. Yeah. So effort towards virtuous deeds, and then because of perfection of the bodhisattva jnana, so it also says effort in relation to working for the benefit of sentient beings, right? Yeah. Then the effort becomes an antidote to laziness. So we have all kinds of laziness. Some people are lazy because they like sleep, but there's many other types of laziness as well. You know, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he hardly sleep. I mean, maybe 10, 15 minutes, you know, every 24 hours. So when you're attending Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you have to go without quite some sleep, you know. And sometimes he said, "Oh, where is he? Oh, he's sleeping again, is it?" Because you only get like 2 hours of sleep if you attend Rinpoche for some time. So then when Rinpoche leaves, then you sleep for a few days, day and night. So Rinpoche has this kind of incredible effort. You know, it's very inspiring to see. So we have this kind of laziness, not only attached to sleep, but there's different types of laziness. Procrastination. Oh, I do that a bit later. There's also a form of laziness, right? And low self-esteem or inadequacy. Oh, I cannot do this. It's too difficult. You know, it's also a form of laziness. You know, right? And then careless. Oh, it doesn't matter. You know, with non-virtue or with neutral deeds. You know, because we like to practice virtue, right? So the other two neutral ones and non-virtue or bad actions, it doesn't matter. Kind of, you know, there's also a form of laziness, right? Okay. So then, from the point of view of inadequacy or low self-esteem, it's very inspiring to read things. In Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo, for example, there's a quotation from Nagarjuna, Ratnavali, about, you know, that sentient beings are equal the amount of space, you know. So there's a need to do something, you know, because they're suffering, right? So there's a need to do something. And then it goes further, okay, but then it's so difficult. Then it says, no, because you're working for countless beings, you accumulate countless causes for enlightenment, you know. It's a very interesting aspect of the path. So if you read Lamrim Chenmo, I don't know even other Lamrims, but Lamrim Chenmo is there in the effort, the perfection of effort section. It's not that, it's only a few pages. It quotes from Nagarjuna's Ratnavali. And that's then based upon one sutra, Lurumi Seva Tempo. It's kind of a sutra, how to translate? It's probably translated in the 84,000. Lurumi Seva Tempo. It's kind of, yeah. Lurumi Seva means inexhaustible intelligence. So probably to the bodhisattva of inexhaustible intelligence. The Buddha taught, you know, these points of limitless sentient beings. And because of that, you know, there's a need to work for the benefit, and there's a possibility to do it because of the costs being created are also limitless. Very interesting. Okay. Yeah, so that's yeah, the effort, perfection effort. Yeah, so two left, concentration and wisdom. Those are two are left. So concentration, as we just discussed, is needed because if we meditate but our mind is distracted all the time, we waste our time, right? So if you meditate but you don't really know what you have to do, or you're not really concentrating, it's a waste of time, right? So that means concentration is very essential to progress, and especially to get insights based on very sharp wisdom with selflessness. You have to have a very stable mind. It's like the, you know, the tree of the tree of the afflictions. You have to cut with the axe of wisdom, right? So if that axe is not with stable hands, it's very difficult to cut. So you need stable hands of concentration, right? Yeah. So concentration, generally speaking, we have a few obstacles, but generally speaking, to summarize it, because we don't have that much time left anymore, but this kind of laxity and excitement. Laxity and excitement are the two main obstacles of concentration, right? Either the mind is too dull, I mean, you wake up in the morning, you wash your face, you know, you sit on your cushion, and then the mind doesn't really move because you're still sleepy, you know? Or you read a book, but it doesn't go in. You know that feeling? I have a lot of problems with that feeling. It's a kind of very dull mind, you know? Yeah, so that's not a very beneficial mind to contemplate, right? This kind of mental dullness or laxity, as we say. It's an obstacle, right? It's an obstacle to concentrate, right? You see that? So then I always say you take a few cappuccinos, maybe 4 or 5 very strong ones. You have one person here who makes strong coffee. I always have a very weak one, but if you're very strong, then the mind goes like, you know, like that. So that's what we call excitement, you know, when the mind scatters. We don't have to drink that much coffee because most of the time our mind is scattered enough. You know? we try to concentrate for a few seconds, but before you know it, the mind is on the other part of the planet, or, you know, another all the time kind of frame. You know? So, yeah. So laxity and excitement are the two main obstacles of meditation, right? Yeah. So they have to be taken care of. Meaning, you apply antidotes, right? So we have 2 antidotes with this alertness and mindfulness, yeah, or sometimes translated as alertness. Some people translate as introspection. Some people, Jamyang translated as meta-awareness, for example. So there's many possibilities. Yeah, so if you keep alertness, then it means that the mind, you know, is meditating on something, or concentration when we do the breath, for example. The mind concentrates on the breath, yeah? But from the corner of the mind, it's alert. If the mind gets distracted to thinking about past, the future, or something else, right? So it recognizes that, alertness. You see that? Like a policeman in the corner of the mind. Then with mindfulness, yeah, so mindfulness is kind of remembrance. It's the real meaning of mindfulness. That is true in Tibetan, Sanskrit, as well as in Pali, in the Theravada tradition, same thing. Yeah, so mindfulness means to remember. In this case, to remember your object of concentration, which is the breathing. Yeah, so you concentrate on the breath, you count from 1 to 10, then the mind wanders off, you recognize that, alert. Then with mindfulness, you make sure that your mind goes back to what you were doing, which is counting on the breath, you see? So you see there's so many mental factors preventing the mind from wandering around. So if those two mental factors are not present, then sometimes it happens that we're meditating and before we know it, a few minutes just gone and we just somewhere else, right? So that's meaning that those two mental factors were not present, right? So that meditation needs a kind of effort. Meditation doesn't mean, oh, peaceful, quiet. No, that's not real meditation, right? Real meditation needs kind of two factors. Then if you have those two factors well developed, then the real peace comes. Yeah? So this a little bit of, oh, nice, is not the real peace, right? It's just kind of a mind of the desire round. It's very coarse. If you practice these two mental factors well, and you prevent laxity and excitement, and you can concentrate, yeah, over time, it's possible to concentrate as long as you wish, you know. If that's been achieved, this calm abiding, then the real peace of mind comes. Then this mind is just blissed out. Then the happiness you get from that mind, it belongs to the former realm, for example, which is kind of the real calm abiding, or you know, samatha, right? If that mind comes, then there's so much peace, so much bliss and happiness. It's a kind of based on this effort of those two mental factors, right? Yeah. So that's the concentration, and then the mind becomes very powerful because you can concentrate without being distracted. So you can imagine that meditation produces incredible kind of insights, right? So if you can do analytical meditation without a second distraction, there's a clarity, analyze, come to a conclusion, focus. The mind is very powerful, right? It becomes incredible imprints, you know? Meaning then only the realizations will come. Yeah, so that's why there's need for concentration. Yeah, so there's many types of concentration, but yeah, to cut it short. Yeah, so wisdom, last one. So this is a very short presentation, and also in the Lamrim you will see there's first a short presentation, and then concentration and wisdom are taken separately because it's more difficult. So it's more elaborately explained. Right? So that's true in shorter Lamrims, and even more true in more elaborate Lamrims. Right? Yeah. So wisdom, fractional wisdom, there's kind of wisdom of understanding conventional reality, the wisdom of understanding ultimate reality, right? So it is a knowing based on an analytical approach, right? So same with our analytical meditation as we did, we analyze, okay, you know, if it's really, is it really true that self-cherishing is a cause for suffering and cherishing others is a cause for happiness? Is it true or not, right? So the Buddha said, don't accept what I'm saying, you know? Don't accept you scholars and venerable ones, he says. Don't accept what I say because people respect me and I'm a famous person, you know? The Buddha said, don't accept it. Analyze if it's true or not. It's a very interesting comment, you know? So that means that this Buddha's incredible, skillful means forces us to analyze, right? And it can only be done with wisdom. So we know there's a mental factor among the object ascertaining mental factors, for example. There's a mental factor, wisdom. Right? So there's a kind of, you give you an idea what wisdom is all about. It's a capacity of the mind to analyze, come to an insight on conclusion, and then with concentration you focus on that. Right? So then, that's what we did in this analytical meditation. You analyze, okay, self-cherishing, maybe cause for happiness, maybe not. Okay, probably, yeah. You analyze, come to a conclusion, focus on that conclusion, right? Then, cherishing others. You see, okay, you know, analyze, oh, it's cause for happiness. Then, come to a conclusion, focus on that conclusion, right? You see, you produce your mind or you cause your mind to go in a particular direction based on this wisdom, you know. So yeah, the analytical approach is needed. So that's the wisdom aspect of the conventional reality, and then eventually we have to have the wisdom realizing emptiness. Yes, we just said the real cause, you know, for suffering, or the root cause for suffering, is ignorance, right? There's ignorance of a concrete I and mine. Based on this I'm important, the I that appears very clearly. Based on that, there's self-cherishing attitude. Based on that, there's afflictions or destructive emotions, and that causes suffering, you see? So then we say the cause, the direct cause for suffering are the afflictions. The root cause of the suffering is this ignorance of this concrete, you know, appearance and apprehension or holding or grasping at an I and mine. It appears in a particular way, and we believe it exists the way it appears. And then it causes these concrete building blocks of all the destructive emotions to come about. When we say I, then also mine, right? You say if you have a very strong I, then you also have a strong mind, possessive aspect, you know, with computers or something like that. So this computer, for example, is Jamyang's computer I'm using, but if it breaks down, I think, oh, sorry, yeah, what to do? If it's my computer and breaks down, then I react slightly differently, you see? But the computer is exactly the same. You know, it's just my relationship with the computer is different, which is just a mental fabrication, right? My body is sitting here, my mind being here. And then this computer. If it's mine or Jamyang's, from the point of view of my body and mind and the computer, there's no difference, right? But it's just a mental understanding and the conceptuality, and then the labeling of my computer. Then when it breaks down, I can react completely different. You see? So that's all based, and then react completely different in the sense of, you know, the S word, or have people use, you know, comes up. You know? So that means that irritation that comes is based on this I and then mine, you see? So based on I and mine. So that's the cause of the problems, this concrete concept of I and mine. To think that yourself and your possessions, they exist from their own side, without dependence, right? And that causes a problem. So if you understand things don't exist in a way, but are just in the nature of interdependence, right? So also the zoom looks like, oh no, so concrete out there, all the images. But zoom can just stop like that. And once we had a retreat with Leeds here, not Leeds, no, Land of Joy we did. Yeah. In the beginning of the lockdown, we did a Land of Joy retreat, here from here. And you can't believe, one whole day, the Zoom didn't work in the whole UK. Can you believe that? It happened. So some people were so frustrated, you know. So that means that they cross to the Zoom as working all the time, being permanent, existing from its own side, always there. And then when it's not, because it doesn't exist in that way, when that reality is met, it's a problem. Because we don't like to accept, or we don't believe or understand that actual reality, you see. Yeah, so that's why this concrete concept of I and mine is actually the cause for all the problems, you see. Not only from your own side, I'm important. Then all this kind of afflictions, destructive emotions arise, or mine, my possession, my this. Then afflictions arise. Then all the objects, because you have the concrete, you know, aspect of I, you think everything else is like that, you know. And then all the problems, they just keep building upon each other. Or you have a problem in life, and it's huge, the biggest in the whole universe. You know, so when we have a problem, we think, oh, why only me? I have the biggest problem in the whole country, on the whole planet. It feels like that, right? But that's just, it's nonsense, right? Complete nonsense. But we believe it's reality. That's the problem, you see? So that means we believe this concrete aspect of reality to be true, but actually it's not. And the wisdom has to understand that aspect, you know, that things don't exist the way it appears. Then the real freedom comes, you know? Yeah, so that's in very short, the wisdom aspect, you know? Yeah, you can spend hours, days, weeks and months on this aspect of wisdom, but yeah, maybe another time. Yeah, because it's exactly 6 o'clock. Yeah. So, yeah. Another time we go more deeper in emptiness. It's my favorite, one of my most favorite subjects, actually. I'm not the only one. His Holiness also likes it a lot. So His Holiness, every teaching His Holiness talks about emptiness because it's very important. You know, though it's not always that easy, but it goes to the root. You know, to cut the cause for suffering. So it's a very inspiring subject. You know, just hearing about emptiness, you have to have a lot of merit. You know? Some people, when you start to talk about emptiness, they fall asleep, or they walk away, or something happens. You know? So that means that to understand emptiness is not easy, and difficulties are involved, and that's why we just discussed, right? Practice patience is incredible purification. If you study emptiness and it's difficult, you want to put it aside, then relax, but try to keep going, and it will one day produce an understanding, right? Yeah, if you only like to do the easy things, we never improve. So same thing in your life. If you only think, oh, I'm good, I'm fine, I have this quality, that quality, you never improve, right? So that means you have to invest. Yeah. Anyway, so I hope there was some benefit in talking about the 6 perfections. Yeah. So thank you very much for your interest. And if there's any questions, then you can dedicate some more time to that. What is the difference between self-cherishing and self-care? Also, what is the difference between cherishing others versus cherishing others? Caring for others, Aléon. So self-cherishing and self-care. Self-cherishing is a kind of mind that basically is not a cause for happiness, right? It's a kind of mind that harms. Self-care, the real self-care, as Holiness says, the real self-care is cherishing others. Because, or as Holiness doesn't say self-care, but he says, if you're selfish or self-care, and you be that in an intelligent way, then you cherish others. Because then automatically there's more happiness, right? That's the real self-care, is to achieve more happiness, right? Okay. But yeah, you have to understand that aspect, that what is real self-cherishing is this egoistic I and mine, right? And that's you walk for all the time. And then that's very confusing and causes a lot of disturbance of mind, Well, if you think about others, then actually you think about yourself better, because that's the real cause for happiness for yourself, you see? So there's a real self-care. Also, what is the difference between cherishing others versus caring for others? Because of cherishing for others, you care. It's kind of caring, right? To take care of others on the different levels, right? On a mental level, on a physical level, on a level of advice of the mind, help them, in different ways. So cherishing others is kind of the mind, you can say, right? Which motivates you in actually caring in an act, to act, to help out. When a person has a problem, he or she calls you, you're very busy, but you take time for this person because there's benefit, right? So that's really based on this cherishing others, this caring comes, right? And so it's a cause and effect relationship. Yeah. We can read about different types. Where can we read about different types of concentration? Yeah, there's many texts. In the Lamrim Chenmo, it talks about a little bit, the different concentrations of the form and formless realms, for example. Yeah. But there are more elaborate texts within, I think the Master Program probably translated about the different levels of concentration to be acquired in the form and formless realm. But yeah, make it simple, and maybe in the Lamrim Chenmo, the Lama Tsongkhapa exposition, great exposition of states of part, it talks about different levels of concentration, what is needed. It's a very technical section, but and otherwise Pabongka Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand also has a very clear explanation of how to generate calm abiding, and then this calm abiding becomes a mind of the form realm, for example. Yeah. And yeah, so there's many other texts if you're interested to read, you know. Yeah. Is compassion considered emotion from Buddhist point of view? If not, what is it? So in Buddhism, emotion, yeah, is compassion considered an emotion, it says, from Buddhist point of view. So that means that compassion is a kind of a mental factor, you know. So we have main minds and mental factors. Yeah? So yeah, you can call emotion. We have positive emotion or constructive emotions, right? And destructive emotion. So technically speaking, in Buddhist psychology, we talk about virtuous mental factors and non-virtuous mental factors, right? So virtuous mental factors are the constructive emotions, and non-virtuous mental factors are the destructive ones. Why? Because the virtuous mental factors, they produce happiness, and the non-virtuous mental factors produce suffering. Same thing, you know, constructive states of mind or emotions, so to say, they produce peace of mind and happiness, and destructive emotions cause suffering, right? So yeah, it's related. Yeah. That virtue is dedicated, it can. Now a question from Linda. It says, is it true that if virtue is dedicated, it can be destroyed by anger? You know? Yeah, very good question. So, dedicated, there's many debates on this point, a lot of debates. So dedicated meaning in the sense, if you seal it, certain commentaries, they say, with emptiness. We talked about the 3 rounds, the practice of generosity, remember? You, the giver, and the person you give to, and the act of giving. You see those 3 in the nature of interdependence and emptiness. Yeah, some people say you seal the result of that. It can never be destroyed. That's, some people say that, but yeah, there's other interpretations relation to that. So that means that if you dedicate, there's another interpretation, if you dedicate to enlightenment, right? If you dedicate to enlightenment, then it's kind of drop in the ocean. Yeah? So that drop will never evaporate until the whole ocean is evaporated, you see? Yeah, so that's kind of a positive aspect. So it's important to dedicate for full enlightenment as well as to seal it with emptiness. Yeah? Then with anger destroying positive potential, you also have to know what has been destroyed. Yeah? So the most of the interpretations in Lama Tsongkhapa's works, it looks like it means that the potential for the result to come about can be destroyed by anger, right? But the root can never be destroyed. You see that? So if you do a positive act in a perfect way and you get angry after that, then that result of that act is being destroyed, but the potential to produce something similar, a certain interpretation says, is not destroyed. So you cannot destroy it from the root. Only the potential for the result to come about can be destroyed. Yeah. Oh, there's a few questions on the sound. How much would you recommend one to practice 6 perfection before they took into the Bodhisattva vows? So yeah, I mean, I would say study the Bodhisattva vows. You know, you're allowed to study. It's very inspiring, you know, to read commentaries on the Bodhisattva vows. And then the 6 perfections, of course, you can study and practice before taking Bodhisattva vows and after. Yeah, because the real practice of the 6 perfections comes later on, right? After taking Bodhisattva vows, etc., etc. But that doesn't say, you know, before taking Bodhisattva vows. Of course, we you know, habituate ourselves to these 6 perfections already. Yeah? And then study the Bodhisattva vows, and there's a few commentaries you can study. And yeah, it's very inspiring. And then check if you can keep them or not, and if you want to take them or not. This, the Buddha always give ourselves the choice. Same what for monks and nuns, you know, there's one in the ritual. It actually says, you know, are you not pushed by somebody, or you know, do you choose it all by yourself? You know, so it's Bodhisattva vow, same thing. Yeah. You mentioned Nagarjuna Ratnavali. I think, can you confirm this, please? It was about, yeah, right effort. So in Nagarjuna's Ratnavali is being quoted in Lama Tsongkhapa's great exposition of the stage of the path to enlightenment in the section, many sections though, but what I was referring to in the section of the perfection of effort. It quotes quite a few verses about this limitless sentient beings. Because there's a need to work for the benefit, because they're limitless, and they're suffering every second, right? So there's a need. And there's a possibility to achieve enlightenment, because if you work for that great amount of infinite sentient beings, you accumulate infinite causes for enlightenment. Right? So it's kind of a very interesting quotation or quotations. Yeah. Who are you dedicating to who will help seal it? To seal it, yeah, we just talked about it. The best thing to dedicate, I mean, if you dedicate for happiness today, right? Very short-sighted, but you can. People, if you dedicate all the good things you did today for happiness right now, you know, then when the right now is over and you experience a little bit of happiness, that merit is gone, exhausted, finished. You know? If you dedicate for a future lifetime happiness, then when you achieve that future lifetime, that merit is exhausted, right? If you dedicate for liberation, when you achieve liberation, that merit is exhausted. Right? If you dedicate for enlightenment, until enlightenment has been achieved, that merit never gets exhausted. There's this drop in the ocean I just mentioned, right? So that means that if you dedicate for enlightenment, automatically you get happiness. Automatically you get good rebirths. You know, it's kind of the far vision or the vast kind of intention. Yeah, so that's why it's very important to dedicate for the great purpose, enlightenment, far away. Yeah. And then, yeah, if you think, when you dedicate also about emptiness at the same time, or whatever understanding you have of interdependence, it's as an extra kind of protection, you know? Yeah. Yeah. Then somebody has to leave and says, thank you. And that's it, you know? Okay. C'est ça? C'est fini. Thank you very much for all your interest.
Oh, thank you.
I hope to be soon in the real world, the more real reality one day, to come to Bath and those areas. Yeah. So let's see. Maybe later. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you on behalf of everyone. And